Dad opened the door. On a freezing Christmas night, I stood trembling on my father's porch, clutching my soaking wet 1-year-old daughter. He brought his mistress home, I whispered. His mother packed up our things, threw the two of us out, and locked the door. My father looked at his little granddaughter shivering from the cold. Then he tightened his grip on the ring of keys in his hand. They picked the wrong family. My name is Megan, 33 years old, and I am a forensic accountant. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated your worth. Exactly 1 hour before I ended up on my father's porch, I was pulling into my own snow-covered driveway in the Chicago suburbs. I had just wrapped up a grueling 14-hour forensic audit for a corporate client tracking down hidden offshore accounts. My bones ached from the long day. All I wanted was to hold my daughter Lily and start our quiet Christmas Eve traditions by the fireplace. Instead, I found my mother-in-law Beatrice standing on the front steps in her designer winter coat. She was holding Lily's floral diaper bag. Before I could even turn off the engine of my car, Beatrice hurled the bag straight onto the icy concrete of the driveway. Baby bottles, powdered formula, and tiny wool socks scattered across the freezing slush. I rushed out of my car with my heart pounding in my throat, demanding to know what on earth she was doing. The grand double doors of our house stood wide open. Inside the brightly lit foyer stood my husband Trent, looking perfectly styled in his expensive cashmere sweater. And right beside him, casually holding a crystal glass of our expensive champagne, was a woman I immediately recognized. Her name was Brittany. She was 25 years old, the arrogant daughter of a wealthy business partner Trent had been desperately trying to court for his hedge fund firm. Worse, she was wearing my custom silk robe. Beatrice marched down the steps, her heels crunching on the ice, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger right at my chest. I told Trent from the very beginning that marrying a public school accountant would bring nothing but bad luck. She sneered, her voice echoing in the quiet neighborhood. You are a working-class nobody who drags his elite image down. Brittany comes from a family with a massive trust fund. She belongs here. Now get out. The deed to this house is in my son's name. I looked past the vicious older woman to Trent. We had been married for 4 years. I had financially supported him when his boutique hedge fund was struggling to get off the ground, working endless hours, analyzing corporate fraud just to pay our bills while he played the role of a big-shot investor downtown. Now that he had a taste of real high society money, he was discarding me like trash on Christmas Eve. Trent, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level despite the freezing wind biting at my face. Are you seriously letting your mother throw your wife and 1-year-old daughter into the snow so you can entertain your mistress? Trent adjusted his luxury watch completely, refusing to meet my eyes. Brittany and I are merging our lives, Megan, he stated coldly. Her family's commercial real estate empire is exactly the kind of financial backing my fund needs to reach the next level. You have been holding me back with your small-minded mentality. My mother packed your bags. They are sitting in the garage. Take Lily and go back to your father's little fishing shack. Brittany took a delicate sip of champagne, leaning her head against my husband's shoulder. Do leave the keys to the Audi, Megan, she mocked, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. That car was bought with Trent's money, and it is far too nice for someone of your low social standing. A normal person might have screamed. A normal person might have dropped to their knees in the snow and begged for their marriage to be saved. But dealing with high-level financial fraud all day teaches you to separate messy emotions from cold, hard facts. And the hard facts were that these people were incredibly stupid. I did not shed a single tear. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the heavy set of Audi keys, and tossed them carelessly onto the hardwood floor of the foyer. They landed with a sharp clatter right at Brittany's manicured toes. Keep the car, I said, staring directly into Trent's suddenly nervous eyes. Keep the car and keep the man. Just do not say I did not warn you. Did not warn. I scooped up my shivering daughter from the back seat of my old reliable sedan, grabbed the few garbage bags Beatrice had violently shoved into the garage, and drove away into the winter storm without looking back once. That brings me back to my father's porch. Thomas was a 62-year-old man who loved wearing faded flannel shirts and spending his weekends fishing quietly on Lake Michigan. Trent and Beatrice had always treated my father like a peasant, openly mocking his calloused hands and simple lifestyle. They genuinely thought he was just a retired blue-collar worker living on a meager pension. They had absolutely no idea that my father was an anonymous billionaire. He owned a massive network of commercial real estate shell companies across the Midwest. He was the quiet, invisible puppet master behind some of the largest corporate developments in Chicago. When I stepped into his warm wood-paneled living room and stripped the wet coats off Lily, I told him exactly what Trent and Beatrice had done. I told him how they mocked his background, how they paraded a trust fund heiress in my home, and how Trent arrogantly claimed the house belonged solely to him. My father did not shout. He did not punch a wall or throw a tantrum. He calmly handed me a warm mug of tea, picked up his secure smartphone, and dialed a number he rarely used. Trigger Clause 4. "Be on the Michigan property," my father commanded into the receiver, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Yes, the estate Trent resides in. Foreclose it. I want the legal process initiated tonight. Merry Christmas." He hung up the phone and looked at me with eyes as cold as the winter storm outside. "They threw my girls out in the cold. By Tuesday morning, they will understand what being homeless actually feels like." Before I could even process the magnitude of my father's swift retaliation, my own phone vibrated aggressively in my pocket. It was a rapid string of automated text messages from my bank. Trent had just completely drained our joint savings account. He had unilaterally frozen all my personal credit cards. A final text from Trent popped up on my glowing screen. "Be a good girl and sign the divorce papers giving me full custody of Lily. If you fight me, you will not have a single penny to buy formula for her." I stared at the threatening message, a cold, dangerous smile slowly forming on my face. Trent thought he had left me completely destitute. He thought I was just a naive accountant who crunched numbers for local schools. He was about to find out exactly what forensic accountants do to arrogant men who hide stolen money. The glow of my phone screen illuminated the dark guest room as I read Trent's text message again. He wanted me to be a good girl and sign away my daughter, or he would starve us out. I sat on the edge of the twin bed listening to the soft, steady breathing of Lily sleeping safely under a thick quilt. A normal mother, unexpectedly homeless on Christmas morning with $0 in her checking account, would be in a state of sheer panic. I was not a normal mother. I was a forensic accountant. I walked down the hall to my father's study, the hardwood floor cold beneath my bare feet. I did not need to cry. Crying was a useless expenditure of energy, and right now I needed razor-sharp focus. I opened my laptop and bypassed the standard login screen, entering a sequence of encrypted passwords that granted me access to a private, highly secure financial portal. For the past 4 years, Trent and Beatrice had relentlessly mocked my career. Whenever we attended Trent's flashy corporate dinners, Beatrice would introduce me with an apologetic sigh, telling her high society friends that I was just a low-level number cruncher for a mid-tier accounting firm. Trent never corrected her. He loved playing the brilliant hedge fund manager who had generously rescued a poor working-class woman from a life of mediocrity. They never bothered to ask for the name of the firm. If they had, they would have realized that the company name on my business cards was not my employer. It was my asset. I did not work for the elite forensic auditing firm. I owned it entirely. While Trent spent his days drinking expensive scotch with prospective clients and gambling his investors' money on risky real estate ventures, I was building an empire analyzing corporate fraud for Fortune 500 companies. I had quietly amassed more personal wealth than Trent had ever actually touched, but I kept my lifestyle modest to avoid bruising his fragile narcissistic ego. That was my first mistake, one I was about to rectify. Trent thought he had dealt a lethal blow by freezing our joint bank account and suspending the credit cards attached to it. He assumed my entire financial existence relied on his approval. He had no idea that I maintained independent corporate accounts holding millions in operating capital. I navigated through my banking dashboard and initiated a swift transfer of $50,000 into a newly established untraceable personal account. That took care of Lily's formula. Next, I pulled up the asset registry for my firm. Trent loved his sleek black Audi. He polished it every Sunday and parked it prominently in our driveway so the neighbors could admire his success. What the neighbors did not know, and what Trent conveniently forgot, was that his struggling hedge fund could not secure the financing for that car 2 years ago. To save his pride, I had leased the vehicle through my company's corporate fleet program and simply let him drive it. Legally, the car belonged to my firm. I pulled up the vehicle's GPS tracking data. The little blinking dot showed the Audi parked exactly where I had left it in the driveway of the house Beatrice had just kicked me out of. But the dashcam logs showed something much more interesting. Brittany had been driving it all morning, running last-minute Christmas errands while wrapped in my coat. I picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the local police department. I identified myself as the CEO of my firm and calmly reported a corporate vehicle stolen. I explicitly stated that an unauthorized driver named Brittany was currently in possession of the car and that the primary leaseholder, Trent, had unlawfully permitted her to use it. The dispatcher took down the details, noting the GPS coordinates I provided. The trap was set. I spent the next 2 hours drinking black coffee with my father, watching the morning news, while Lily played happily on the rug with a set of wooden blocks. Thomas did not ask me what my plan was. He knew I operated with the same ruthless efficiency he did. He simply waited for the inevitable fallout. At exactly 10:15, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Beatrice's name. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the visual before answering with a perfectly even tone. "Megan, what on earth did you do?" Beatrice shrieked into the receiver, her voice shrill enough to make me pull the phone away from my ear. "You vindictive, psychotic woman. I am calling my lawyers." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning, Beatrice. Merry Christmas to you too." "Do not play games with me," she screamed, her breath hitching with genuine panic. We were right in the middle of our Christmas brunch with Brittany's parents. The police just showed up with a tow truck. They humiliated us in front of the entire neighborhood. They made Brittany empty her purse on the hood of the car, and they actually threatened to arrest her for grand theft auto. Trent had to beg the officers to let her go. I smiled at the mental image of the arrogant trust fund heiress being interrogated by uniformed officers while her parents watched in horror. "That sounds incredibly stressful, Beatrice. Perhaps she should not drive stolen property." "Stolen?" Beatrice scoffed, the absolute audacity dripping from her voice. "Trent pays for that car. Trent bought that car with his hard-earned money. You are just a bitter, jealous ex-wife trying to ruin his new relationship. I will make sure the judge hears about this when Trent files for full custody of Lily. You belong in a psych ward." I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen island. The time for playing the quiet, supportive wife was officially over. "Trent does not own that car, Beatrice," I stated, slicing right through her hysterics with freezing precision. "Trent was leasing that vehicle from my corporate fleet because his own credit score was too pathetic to secure a loan. The insurance, the title, and the registration are all held by my firm. By handing those keys to a woman not authorized on the corporate policy, Trent committed a breach of contract. By driving it, Brittany committed a felony. I just reported it stolen by an unauthorized driver." Dead silence hung on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in Beatrice's mind as she desperately tried to reconcile the image of her plain working-class daughter-in-law with the woman currently destroying her Christmas morning. "Corporate fleet." Beatrice finally stammered, her voice losing its aggressive edge. "What are you talking about? You are a low-level accountant. You do not have a corporate fleet." I leaned against the counter, watching the snow fall outside my father's window. "That is the problem with narcissists, Beatrice. You are so busy looking down on everyone else that you never bother to check who actually owns the ground you are standing on. Trent's accounts are frozen. The car is gone. And if Brittany's parents have a shred of sense, they are already out the door." I hung up the phone and blocked her number. It was a flawless opening move, a clean strike that exposed Trent's financial fragility right in front of his new high society targets. But I knew Trent better than anyone. He was backed into a corner, his pride severely wounded in front of the mistress he was trying to impress. He would not just roll over and accept defeat. A man like Trent always struck back, and he always aimed for the most vulnerable target. My phone vibrated again, breaking my focus. This time it was an automated email alert from the family court system. My stomach tightened as I opened the attachment. Trent had just filed an ex parte emergency custody order for Lily, claiming I was mentally unstable, unemployed, and a danger to my child. The legal battle had officially begun, and Trent thought he had the upper hand. He was dead wrong. The email attachment loaded on my screen with a harsh white glare. It was a digital copy of an ex parte emergency custody petition filed in Cook County Family Court. Trent had wasted zero time. The ink on the digital signature was practically still wet. I read through his sworn affidavit. The sheer volume of lies was staggering. Trent claimed that I had suffered a mental breakdown on Christmas Eve. He swore under penalty of perjury that I was entirely unemployed, completely destitute, and currently homeless, forcing our 1-year-old daughter to sleep in a frozen car. He even spun the morning's towing incident, claiming I had maliciously filed a false police report to steal his vehicle in a fit of postpartum rage. The petition demanded immediate full physical custody of Lily. He was requesting that Child Protective Services alongside local law enforcement retrieve my daughter from my care by any means necessary. Trent was utilizing the legal system exactly how a classic abuser does. He was trying to panic me. He wanted me to scramble, to scream, to show up at his mother's house, making a scene so he could point a finger and call me hysterical. In his mind, I was just a naive public school accountant with no resources and no connections. He believed his high-priced downtown lawyer could bulldoze right over me. I looked at Lily. She was sitting on my father's expensive Persian rug, happily stacking her wooden blocks, completely oblivious to the fact that her father was trying to use her as a pawn in a financial power play. I did not panic. I closed the email and opened a secure virtual private network connected directly to my firm's servers. An ex parte order meant Trent had spoken to a judge without me present, pushing a narrative of immediate danger to get a temporary ruling. I knew the standard operating procedure for Cook County. Child Protective Services would dispatch a social worker to my last known location, or my father's address within the hour, to conduct a welfare check. I had exactly 60 minutes to build a fortress around my child. I turned to my father. Thomas was already watching me, his arms crossed over his faded flannel shirt. Trent filed for emergency custody, I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of panic. He told a judge I am homeless, unemployed, and a danger to Lily. A social worker is going to be knocking on that front door very soon. My father did not flinch. He simply nodded and walked over to his heavy mahogany desk. He unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick fireproof folder. "Let them knock," my father replied calmly. I fired up the laser printer in the corner of the study. First, I printed my most recent corporate tax returns and my personal W-2 forms. They clearly displayed my 7-figure annual income and my title as Chief Executive Officer of a premier forensic auditing firm. Next, I printed the legal registration and insurance policy for the Audi, proving irrefutably that Trent was the one lying to the authorities about the vehicle. My father slid a heavy stack of papers onto the desk next to my printer. It was the deed to his property. Trent had called this place a little fishing shack in his court filing. The deed proved it was a fully paid-off $3 million lakefront estate held in an irrevocable trust. I took a heavy-duty binder and began compiling the documents. I tabbed and highlighted every single financial fact that contradicted Trent's sworn affidavit. I included Lily's pristine medical records, my comprehensive health insurance policy, and a printout of the bank notification showing that Trent was the one who had maliciously frozen my checking account on Christmas morning. 45 minutes later, the heavy brass knocker on my father's front door sounded. I opened the door to find a severe-looking woman holding a clipboard flanked by a local police officer. She identified herself as a caseworker for the state and informed me she was there to execute an emergency welfare check on a minor child named Lily. She expected to find a shivering, destitute woman living in squalor. Instead, I invited her into a sprawling, immaculately heated foyer with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I offered her a cup of artisan coffee. Then I handed her the 3-inch binder. "I believe my estranged husband has filed a fraudulent petition," I told the caseworker in a polite professional tone. "Inside that binder, you will find certified proof of my executive employment, my 7-figure income, my comprehensive insurance policies, and the deed to this $3 million estate where my daughter has her own fully furnished nursery. You will also find proof that my husband committed perjury by claiming ownership of a vehicle that belongs to my corporate fleet." The caseworker opened the binder. The police officer peered over her shoulder. I watched the severe expression on the woman's face dissolve into complete bewilderment as she flipped through the pages. She looked from the certified corporate tax returns to the custom-built stone fireplace in my father's living room. She then looked at Lily, who was giggling and eating organic fruit puffs in her high chair. The caseworker closed the binder and handed it back to me. She apologized profusely for the intrusion, stating that the environment was obviously safe and that she would be advising the family court judge that the emergency order was entirely baseless. The police officer tipped his hat to me, and they both walked out the door. The immediate physical threat was neutralized, but Trent's legal filing meant a mandatory court hearing was automatically scheduled for the following week. I knew Trent would not stop. He would hire the most aggressive, unethical family lawyer in Chicago to drag me through the mud. I needed to annihilate his public standing before he even stepped foot inside a courtroom. As I was organizing my files on the desk, my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar Chicago area code. I rarely answered unknown numbers, but my instincts told me to pick up. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Megan," a deep, steady voice spoke on the other end of the line. "You do not know me well, but I am Andre, Trent's brother-in-law." I recognized the name immediately. Andre was married to Trent's sister Courtney. He was a highly respected corporate lawyer and the only person in Trent's family who ever treated me with basic human decency. "I am listening, Andre," I replied. "I am looking at some very disturbing financial documents right now." Andre continued, his voice dropping lower. "I just discovered that Trent is quietly draining my niece's college funds. He is stealing from his own family to finance his mistress and cover up massive losses at his hedge fund. He thinks he can get away with it because he thinks no one is looking. Do you want to destroy him together?" I pushed my laptop into my bag and told my father I had an urgent meeting. 30 minutes later, I walked into a dimly lit independent coffee shop on the edge of the financial district. Andre was already sitting in a corner booth nursing a black coffee. He was 36 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, and possessed a quiet, intimidating intelligence. Andre was a senior partner at a top-tier corporate law firm. He was also an African-American man who had married into a family of arrogant old money wannabes. I slid into the booth across from him, skipping any polite greetings. "You said Trent is stealing from your daughters," I stated, keeping my voice low so the barista wiping down the espresso machine could not hear. Andre slid a manila folder across the scratched wooden table. "I have endured Beatrice and Trent for 7 years, Megan. 7 years of Beatrice introducing me to her country club friends as Courtney's urban husband. 7 years of Trent treating me like a diversity hire who got lucky, even though I graduated top of my class at Yale Law and make 3 times what his pathetic hedge fund brings in. I tolerated their thinly veiled racism and their blatant classism because I love my wife. But they just crossed a line I will not forgive." I opened the folder. Inside were printed bank statements for 2 college savings accounts. They were completely empty. Trent convinced Courtney to let him manage the girls' education funds when they were born. Andre explained, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. He told her his hedge fund would yield a much higher return than standard market rates. Courtney trusts her brother blindly. She defended him every time I questioned his investment strategies. Last night, I bypassed Courtney and subpoenaed the account records directly from the holding bank. Trent drained both accounts 4 months ago. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. Trent was not just throwing me out in the snow. He was cannibalizing his own blood relatives to stay afloat. "It gets worse," Andre said, leaning forward. "Trent was at our house at 6 o'clock this morning. He cornered Courtney in the kitchen while I was making breakfast for the kids. He is demanding she sign over the deed to her inherited property in Evanston. He wants her to take out a massive commercial mortgage against it and wire him the cash. He told her it is a temporary liquidity bridge to save his firm from a minor audit issue. He told her if she does not sign it today, his business will collapse and it will be her fault for not supporting the family. Courtney is actually considering it, I asked, horrified. She is terrified, Andre corrected sharply. Trent and Beatrice have spent her entire life conditioning her to fix Trent's messes. They make her feel guilty for having a stable marriage and a secure life. She told me she has to go to the bank with him at 2 o'clock today to authorize the mortgage. If she signs those papers, she will be personally liable for millions in commercial debt. Trent will take the cash, sink it into whatever black hole he is hiding, and leave my wife holding the bag. I cannot legally stop her from signing documents regarding her sole inheritance. But you can find out exactly where that money is really going. I did not waste another second. I pulled my laptop out of my bag, opened it on the coffee shop table, and booted up my encrypted forensic software. Give me the routing numbers from the drained college accounts, I demanded, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. If Trent moved that money, he left a digital footprint. He thinks he is a financial genius, but he is just a sloppy narcissist who relies on bullying rather than actual strategy. Andre read off the routing numbers from his file. I typed them into the tracking software I used to hunt down hidden assets for Fortune 500 companies. I bypassed standard banking firewalls using the federal auditing credentials my firm maintained. Lines of code and transaction histories began scrolling rapidly across my screen. I traced the first $50,000 missing from the college funds. Trent had not invested it. He had routed it through a shell company registered in Delaware and then wired it directly to a high-end luxury jeweler in downtown Chicago. He bought Brittany a diamond tennis bracelet with your daughter's college money, I said, pointing to the screen. Andre's expression turned to absolute stone. Find the rest of it, he ordered softly. Find every single cent. I dug deeper. I pulled up the primary operating accounts for Trent's hedge fund. I ran a comparative analysis between his reported client earnings and the actual cash reserves held in his clearinghouse. The numbers were not just slightly off, they were catastrophically wrong. My heart hammered against my ribs as I initiated a full-spectrum audit of his ledger. I watched the red flags populate on my screen one after another. Fake invoices, phantom vendors, inflated return reports sent to his clients. Trent was not just making bad trades and losing money to the market, he was actively manufacturing fake investment portfolios. When clients wired him funds to invest, he was diverting a massive percentage of their principal directly into a dummy corporation called Apex Holdings. I ran a quick search on Apex Holdings. The sole registered managing director was Trent. I stopped typing and looked up at Andre. The blood had rushed out of my face. This is not a liquidity problem, I whispered, turning the laptop screen so Andre could see the final tally, highlighted in glaring red text. Trent is not just broke, he is running a Ponzi scheme. He has completely fabricated his last 3 quarterly reports. Andre stared at the staggering negative balance on the screen. How much is missing? $4.5 million. I said, the reality of the situation settling over us like a suffocating blanket. He has embezzled $4.5 million in client funds. That is what he needs Courtney's mortgage for. He is trying to replace the stolen money before his investors demand their year-end payouts next week. If Courtney signs those papers at the bank today, she becomes an accessory to federal wire fraud. Andre stood up from the booth, pulling his phone from his pocket. His eyes were blazing with the kind of ruthless determination that made him a lethal corporate attorney. Pack up your laptop, Andre commanded. We have less than an hour before Trent forces my wife to sign her life away. We are going to shut this down right now. I kept my laptop open on the scratched wooden table of the coffee shop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. We did not have time to drive to the bank. By the time we navigated through Chicago's afternoon traffic, Trent would have Courtney's signature on the commercial loan, and the $4.5 million would be permanently lost in the labyrinth of Apex Holdings. We had to stop the transaction digitally. Andre pulled his phone from his tailored suit jacket and dialed Courtney's number. It went straight to voicemail. He slammed his hand against the booth. Trent took her phone. He knows if I get a hold of her, I will talk her out of it. He isolated her. I need the name of the bank and the specific branch manager they are dealing with. I said, my eyes locked on the dual screens I had virtually configured on my laptop. First Sterling Bank on LaSalle Street. Andre replied instantly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The manager's name is David Peterson. He has handled Trent's corporate accounts for years. Peterson is an arrogant suit who loves catering to the hedge fund crowd. I accessed the Federal Banking Registry and pulled up First Sterling's institutional routing protocols. I could not illegally hack into their closed server, but as a certified forensic auditor, I had authorized clearance to monitor pending large-scale commercial wire transfers flagged for anti-money laundering compliance. I entered Trent's corporate identification numbers and Courtney's estate details. A notification pinged on my screen. They are in the office right now, I told Andre, watching the data populate in real time. Peterson just initiated an expedited commercial bridge loan against Courtney's Evanston property. Trent requested a direct wire transfer of $4.5 million to be released the second her signature touches the digital pad. The status says pending final authorization. We have less than 3 minutes. Call him, I ordered, turning the screen toward Andre. Put him on speaker. I will feed you the ammunition. Andre dialed the bank manager's direct desk line. It rang twice before a polished, overly smooth voice answered. David Peterson speaking. David, this is Andre Sterling. I am Courtney's husband and her legal counsel. You need to halt the mortgage authorization you are currently processing immediately. There was a brief, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. Andre, good to hear from you. Unfortunately, Courtney and Trent are right here in my office finalizing a private family business matter. Courtney is a consenting adult handling her sole inheritance. I cannot halt a transaction just because a spouse disagrees with it. Peterson was using a dismissive, patronizing tone, the exact same tone Trent used whenever he spoke to Andre. It was the sound of a man who thought he held all the power. I began typing frantically. I opened a new document and enlarged the font so Andre could read it clearly across the table. I typed a specific sequence of federal banking statutes. Andre read the screen and his voice turned to absolute ice. David, this is not a domestic dispute. You are currently facilitating the transfer of funds into Apex Holdings. I am formally advising you that Apex Holdings is a verified dummy corporation being used to operate a Ponzi scheme. I heard a sharp intake of breath over the speakerphone. I kept typing, feeding Andre the exact legal daggers required to terrify a compliance officer. If you allow Courtney to sign that document, Andre continued reading directly from my screen, you and First Sterling Bank are actively participating in the laundering of illicit funds under Title 18 United States Code, Section 1956. Furthermore, you will be personally named as an accessory to federal wire fraud under Section 1343. I have a certified forensic accountant currently monitoring your clearinghouse portal. If you push that wire through, my next call is to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and my third call is to the FBI field office in Chicago. The silence on the line was deafening. I watched the transaction status indicator on my screen. It was glowing yellow, waiting for the final click. Mr. Sterling Peterson stammered, his polished arrogance completely shattering. These are incredibly severe allegations. Trent assured me this was a standard liquidity bridge for a minor audit discrepancy. Trent is embezzling $4.5 million from his clients, Andre stated flatly. Step away from the computer, David. Cancel the wire. I held my breath, staring at the flashing yellow indicator on my screen. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Suddenly the yellow light turned red. The word voided flashed across the transaction ledger. I just canceled the authorization, Peterson said, his voice trembling. The loan is voided. The funds are locked. Get my wife out of your office, Andre commanded, and tell Trent to find a good defense attorney. Andre hung up the phone and slumped back against the leather booth, exhaling a massive breath. We did it. Courtney is safe. I stared at the voided transaction on my screen, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Trent's lifeline was officially severed. He was exposed broke and days away from a federal indictment. I had just dismantled his entire fraudulent empire from a coffee shop table, but my satisfaction lasted exactly 10 seconds. My cell phone rang, shattering the quiet relief in the booth. The caller ID displayed Trent's number. He had never called me directly during a fight. He always used his mother or his lawyers to do his dirty work. I answered the call and put it on speaker. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Megan," Trent hissed through the phone. The background noise sounded like a rushing car engine. He was driving fast. "Peterson just kicked me out of the bank. He told me Andre threatened an SEC audit using a forensic accountant. I know it was you. I know you two teamed up to humiliate me." "You humiliated yourself, Trent," I replied smoothly. "Your Ponzi scheme is over. The embezzlement is documented. You are going to federal prison." Trent let out a manic, erratic laugh. It was the sound of a desperate, cornered animal. "I am not going anywhere, Megan. Because you are going to drop this entire investigation. You are going to sign over your corporate assets to cover my losses. And you are going to do it today." I looked at Andre completely bewildered. "You have zero leverage, Trent. You have nothing." "I have a friend in the police department," Trent spat back. "You remember Officer Miller? We play golf together every Sunday. He owes me a massive favor. I just showed him the emergency custody order I filed this morning. The one that says you are a homeless, unstable danger to our daughter." A spike of pure terror shot straight through my heart. The social worker had dismissed the claim, but the order itself was still sitting in the system awaiting the formal hearing. To a corrupt cop, it was a perfectly valid excuse to act. "Where are you, Trent?" I demanded, my voice finally cracking. "I am pulling up to Lily's daycare right now," he said, his tone dripping with malicious triumph. "Officer Miller is in his squad car right behind me. We are going to execute a lawful retrieval of a minor child. Let us see your fancy spreadsheet stop a badge, Megan. I will call you when I have my daughter." The drive to the daycare took exactly 12 minutes, but with my heart hammering against my ribs, it felt like an eternity. Andre navigated the busy Chicago streets with lethal precision, his phone connected to the car's Bluetooth as he rapid-fired commands to a senior judge he had known for a decade. The legal system was often a slow, bureaucratic machine, but when a top-tier corporate lawyer called a judge directly to report an active kidnapping attempt by a man under federal investigation, the wheels of justice spun at breakneck speed. My phone chimed with an incoming encrypted file just as Andre slammed the car into park in front of the brightly colored building. It was a digitally signed, legally binding emergency protective order. It immediately superseded Trent's fraudulent ex parte filing and granted me sole, unmitigated physical custody of Lily. I printed the documents using the mobile printer Andre kept in his back seat, sliding the warm pages into a pristine manila folder. I did not run toward the entrance. Running indicated panic, and panic was the precise emotion Trent was desperate to extract from me. I smoothed my coat, squared my shoulders, and walked through the double-glass doors with the terrifying calm of an executioner. Inside the lobby, the scene was absolute chaos. Trent was red in the face, slamming his fist against the receptionist's security glass. He was waving his printout of the canceled custody order, bellowing at the terrified daycare director about his parental rights. Beside him stood Officer Miller, a burly, intimidating cop, who was using his physical presence to block the doorway. Miller had his hand resting casually on his utility belt, glaring at the staff. "Open the secure door right now before I have this officer arrest you for child abduction." Trent screamed, his voice echoing off the walls decorated with children's finger paintings. "My ex-wife is a mentally unstable vagrant, and I am taking my daughter." I stepped fully into the lobby, the sharp click of my heels cutting through his temper tantrum. "The only person going to jail today is you, Trent," I stated, my voice echoing evenly across the room. Trent whipped around. His face morphed from enraged arrogance to momentary shock before settling into a vicious, triumphant smirk. He pointed a finger at my chest and turned to his corrupt golfing buddy. "There she is," Miller Trent declared loudly. The unstable mother I told you about. Restrain her and get my daughter out here. Officer Miller took a heavy step toward me, puffing out his chest to maximize his authority. Ma'am, I have a signed court order here stating you are an unfit guardian. I need you to stand down and let the father take custody of the child. Do not make me put you in handcuffs. A normal mother would have broken down sobbing. I simply held up my hand and stepped right into Miller's personal space, completely unfazed by the badge on his chest. Before you make the worst career decision of your life, Officer Miller, I suggest you review the superseding legal documents I hold in my hand, I said, maintaining absolute unwavering eye contact. I handed him the manila folder. Miller frowned, snatched it from my grip, and flipped it open. I watched his eyes scan the first page. It was the emergency protective order signed by a federal judge exactly 10 minutes ago, nullifying Trent's fraudulent custody grab and mandating that Trent stay 500 feet away from my daughter. Trent laughed dismissively. Do not look at her fake spreadsheets, Miller. She prints garbage for a living. Just grab the kid. I ignored Trent entirely and kept my gaze locked on the police officer. Turn to the second page, Miller, I instructed coldly. Miller flipped the page. The color rapidly drained from his face. His tough guy demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by the wide-eyed terror of a man realizing he had just stepped onto a landmine. That document is an official notice of active investigation from the Securities and Exchange Commission, cross-referenced with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I explained, making sure my voice carried clearly to the daycare staff listening behind the glass. Trent has embezzled $4.5 million from his clients. He is currently orchestrating a massive Ponzi scheme. He brought you here under false pretenses to kidnap a minor child, hoping your badge would legitimize his crime. If you assist him in laying one single finger on my daughter, I will personally ensure you are named as an accessory to federal wire fraud, extortion, and child endangerment. You will lose your badge, your pension, and your freedom. Officer Miller looked from the federal document in his shaking hands to Trent's suddenly nervous face. The cop was corrupt, but he was not stupid. He recognized radioactive material when he saw it. You told me this was a simple domestic dispute, Trent Miller growled, shoving the folder hard into Trent's chest. You said she was just a broke, crazy housewife trying to steal your car. You never said a damn word about the feds or wire fraud. Miller, come on. We play golf every Sunday. Trent pleaded, his voice cracking as his alpha male facade completely shattered. She is lying. It is a minor corporate audit. I do not care if it is a parking ticket. Miller snapped, backing away toward the lobby doors as if Trent were contagious. I am not losing my pension over your financial mess. Do not ever call me again. Without another word, Officer Miller shoved the lobby doors open and sprinted to his cruiser, peeling out of the parking lot. Trent stood entirely alone in the brightly colored lobby, holding the folder with shaking hands. The arrogant, untouchable hedge fund manager was gone. In his place was a pathetic, cornered fraudster, realizing that his entire house of cards had just collapsed on top of him. The daycare director, sensing the threat was neutralized, buzzed the secure door open. I walked past Trent without sparing him a single glance, scooped my beautiful, smiling daughter into my arms, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. I thought the war was over. I assumed Trent would spend the evening desperately packing a bag and fleeing the state before the federal agents arrived at his door. I severely underestimated the toxic, destructive lengths a narcissist will go to when their ego is fundamentally destroyed. 4 hours later, I was back at my father's house feeding Lily dinner when my phone began vibrating uncontrollably on the counter. Notifications from Facebook, LinkedIn, and corporate messaging boards flooded my screen in a relentless wave. I tapped the screen and opened a notification from a mutual business contact. My blood ran completely cold. Trent had not run. Instead, he had taken the nuclear option. Splashed across every major social media platform was a highly edited, fabricated video. Trent had managed to obtain security camera footage from the coffee shop where Andre and I had just met. He had sliced the footage together, altering the angles and slowing down the frames to make our frantic, intense financial discussion look like a deeply intimate romantic rendezvous. The caption above the video was typed in bold, sensational letters. It accused me of abandoning my child, stealing his corporate assets, and engaging in a torrid long-term affair with his sister's husband. Trent had tagged my elite corporate clients, my father's community network, and Courtney's entire social circle. He was trying to burn my reputation to ash. The video spread with the speed of a lit match dropped in dry brush. Within 20 minutes, my inbox was flooded. Notifications chimed in a relentless, sickening rhythm. Trent had weaponized his high society connections perfectly. He knew that in his world, perception was reality and scandal was currency. The footage was masterfully manipulated. The angle obscured my laptop screen, entirely framing Andre and me, leaning close together across the small coffee shop table. He slowed the frame rate right as Andre handed me his phone, making the brief brush of our hands look entirely intentional and deeply intimate. It was a character assassination designed to destroy my credibility before I could submit my forensic findings to the federal authorities. Then Beatrice got involved. Trent's mother had spent decades cultivating a ruthless network among Chicago's old money elite. She viewed me as a threat to her family's pristine facade, and Trent's video gave her the perfect ammunition to eradicate me. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Richard Vance, the CEO of my largest corporate client. I answered immediately. Megan Richards said, his voice clipped and cold. Beatrice just called my personal cell. She is telling anyone who will listen that you are under investigation for corporate espionage and currently having a public breakdown. I am looking at a video on LinkedIn that is highly disturbing. I am suspending our firm's contract pending an internal review. He hung up before I could explain. Beatrice was systematically working her way through my client roster using her country club clout to poison my professional relationships. She was terrified of the truth, so she decided to burn the messenger. I looked across the kitchen island at Andre. He was staring at his own phone, his jaw locked tight enough to shatter teeth. He had just watched the same video. Before either of us could formulate a counterattack, my phone screen lit up with Courtney's name. I answered and put it on speakerphone, setting it on the marble counter between Andre and me. Courtney, I started. Are you sleeping with my husband? Courtney shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable, choked with hysterical sobs and absolute panic. Tell me the truth right now, Megan. Are you sleeping with him? Trent had hit his ultimate target. He had isolated his sister, fed her a manufactured lie, and watched her unravel. Courtney, listen to me very carefully, I said, keeping my tone dead level. Trent fabricated that video to cover up his own crimes. He is trying to pit you against the only two people who are actively trying to save you from federal prison. I do not believe you, Courtney cried out. My mother just called me. She said Andre has been planning to leave me for months. She said you two are conspiring to steal my inheritance to fund a new life together. Trent showed me the video. You are practically in his lap. Andre leaned over the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble. Courtney, stop listening to your mother and your brother for exactly 10 seconds and listen to me. I love you. I have never been unfaithful to you. Trent is using you as a human shield because he has embezzled $4.5 million and the FBI is closing in. He is lying. Trent's voice suddenly boomed over the line. He was standing right next to her, monitoring the call. He is a cheating liar, Court. Hang up the phone. They are trying to steal your Evanston property. The sound of Courtney sobbing filled the kitchen. I could hear the sheer terror in her voice. She was trapped in an echo chamber of manipulation, surrounded by the people who had conditioned her since childhood to doubt her own reality. We are not going to argue with a cornered rat over a speakerphone, Andre stated, his patience officially exhausted. We are not doing this online, and we are not doing this through Trent's twisted filter. Courtney, you need to leave the house right now. Get away from your brother. I am not going anywhere with you. Courtney wept. You do not have to come to me, Andre replied smoothly. Go to Thomas's office. I glanced at Andre, recognizing the strategic brilliance of the move. Thomas was Andre's senior law partner and a universally respected figure in the Chicago legal community. He was impartial, meticulous, and commanded absolute authority. Even Beatrice respected Thomas. His office was a fortress, completely secure and immune to Trent's aggressive tactics. I will not meet you there, Courtney choked out. Yes, you will, Andre commanded, stripping away any room for negotiation. Because if you do not walk through Thomas's door in exactly 45 minutes, Megan is turning her forensic audit over to the SEC and your brother will be arrested in your living room before dinner. If you want the actual truth, meet us at Thomas's office. Come alone. Andre reached down and disconnected the call. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, charged with adrenaline. We need to print everything Andre instructed, already moving toward the door. Every fake invoice, every phantom vendor, every wire transfer to the Cayman shell accounts. Courtney has spent her entire life believing Trent is a financial genius. Words will not break that conditioning. We have to bury her in paper. I packed my laptop and the portable hard drive containing the complete unredacted audit of Apex Holdings. We were going to war, and our ammunition was undeniable mathematical reality. Thomas's office was located in an unassuming gray stone building on the outskirts of the financial district. It lacked the flashy glass exterior of Trent's downtown high-rise, but the physical security was impenetrable. Thomas was waiting for us in his private conference room. He was a man in his late 60s, with sharp assessing eyes and a demeanor that tolerated exactly zero nonsense. Andre quickly briefed him on the daycare incident, the canceled commercial loan, and the smear video currently circulating through Chicago's high society networks. Thomas simply nodded, his expression turning grim. Trent is employing a classic distraction strategy, Thomas noted, taking my hard drive and sliding it into his secured terminal. When the facts are damning, the guilty attack the character of the accuser. Let us see these facts. I spent the next 20 minutes pulling up the irrefutable evidence of Trent's Ponzi scheme. The heavy oak printer in the corner hummed to life. I printed the ledger showing the exact routing numbers where Trent had diverted client funds into his dummy corporation. I printed the receipt for the diamond tennis bracelet he had purchased using his niece's stolen college funds. I printed the catastrophic negative balance currently sitting in his primary clearinghouse. Thomas reviewed the documents one by one. He took a heavy red ink stamp from his drawer, marking the front cover of the compiled stack. His silence was the most terrifying validation of my work. This is not just embezzlement, Thomas finally said, setting the papers down. This is an orchestrated, multi-year fraud. Your brother-in-law is looking at 20 years in federal prison. The heavy oak door of the conference room swung open. Courtney stood in the doorway. She looked completely shattered. Her makeup was streaked, her designer clothes were rumpled, and her eyes were red and swollen. She clutched her handbag against her chest like a shield, staring at Andre and me with a mixture of profound betrayal and defensive rage. I am only here because Trent said you were trying to extort us, Courtney said, her voice shaking but defiant. My mother is contacting her lawyers right now. You are both disgusting. I want to know exactly what you think you are going to accomplish with this charade. I opened my mouth to speak, but Thomas raised a hand, silencing the room. He did not yell. He did not defend Andre. He did not engage with Courtney's emotional accusations. Instead, Thomas picked up the thick, red-stamped financial dossier containing my complete forensic audit. He looked at Courtney with cold, absolute authority and slid the heavy folder across the polished mahogany desk. Courtney stared at the heavy manila folder resting against the polished mahogany. Her hands were trembling so violently, her diamond tennis bracelet rattled against her wrist. She looked from Thomas to Andre, then finally to me, her eyes searching for the lie. She reached out and flipped the cover open. She expected hotel receipts. She expected private text messages. She expected proof of a betrayal that would end her marriage. Instead, the first page was a master ledger from First Sterling Bank stamped with my forensic firm's official seal. What is this? Courtney whispered, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. This is my private trust, the one my grandfather established. Look at the date on the second page, Thomas instructed, his voice devoid of pity, but heavy with absolute authority. Look at the transaction history from exactly 5 years ago. Courtney turned the page. I watched her perfectly manicured finger trace the highlighted lines of code and transfer logs. 5 years ago, Trent's initial hedge fund venture had taken a catastrophic hit during a market downturn. The public story, the one Beatrice had sold to their country club friends, was that Trent had brilliantly navigated the crash. The reality printed in black and white was that he had margin called himself into oblivion. He drained it. Courtney gasped, the air rushing out of her lungs. He took $7 million from my trust. He did not do it alone, I interjected, keeping my tone strictly professional. Turn to page 4. The authorization signatures required 2 familial trustees. Trent signed on the primary line. Beatrice signed on the secondary. Your mother authorized the systematic draining of your entire grandfathered inheritance to cover your brother's spectacular failure. Courtney physically recoiled from the desk. No, my mother would never do that. She told me the trust was locked until I turned 40. She told me it was compounding. She lied to you to protect the golden child, Andre said softly. He stepped forward, standing right beside her chair. They both lied. And they have been terrified for 5 years that I would find out. I am a corporate litigator, Courtney. If we ever merged our finances completely, or if we ever decided to restructure our estate planning, I would have required a full audit of your family accounts. I would have seen the missing $7 million instantly. The pieces were finally clicking together in Courtney's mind. I could see the exact moment the manufactured reality she had lived in her entire life began to shatter. That is why my mother has been trying to convince me to divorce you, Courtney whispered, staring blankly at the wall. For 5 years, every time we had a minor argument, she told me to leave you. She said you were holding me back. She said you were only after my money. It was projection, Thomas stated bluntly. They were the ones stealing your money. The video Trent posted online today is a smokescreen. Trent needed $4.5 million today to cover a new completely unrelated Ponzi scheme he is running through a dummy corporation called Apex Holdings. He needed you to sign away the Evanston property because your trust is already empty. When Andre and Megan blocked the wire transfer this afternoon, Trent panicked. He fabricated the affair video to distract you, to make you file for an emergency divorce, and to discredit Megan's forensic findings before the federal authorities could see them. Courtney looked down at the documents again. The ink was definitive, the routing numbers were verified, the signatures belonged to her mother and her brother. The people who were supposed to protect her had used her as a human piggy bank, cannibalizing her future to fund Trent's ego. For a full minute, the only sound in the room was Courtney's ragged breathing. She lowered her head, burying her face in her hands, and let out a single gut-wrenching sob. It was the sound of a woman mourning the family she thought she had. Andre did not hesitate. He knelt beside her chair and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He did not say, "I told you so." He just held her while her entire worldview collapsed. Then something remarkable happened. Courtney stopped crying. She took a deep, shuddering breath, sat up straight, and wiped the mascara from her cheeks. When she looked at us again, the terrified, manipulated sister was gone. Her eyes were hard, calculating, and completely devoid of warmth. She looked exactly like the formidable woman Andre had always told me she was beneath the family conditioning. "They think I am stupid," Courtney said, her voice dropping an octave. "My mother and my brother think I am a naive, easily manipulated idiot who will just cry and sign whatever paper they put in front of me." "They severely underestimated you," I replied, closing my laptop and giving her my full attention. "What do we do next?" Courtney asked, looking directly at Thomas. "I want them ruined. I want every single cent tracked down, and I want Trent to face federal charges. I am not protecting them anymore." The trio had officially become a quartet. Thomas steepled his fingers, a predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. "First, we secure the Evanston property into an irrevocable blind trust that Trent cannot touch. Second, we let Trent and Beatrice believe their smear campaign is working. We need them arrogant and careless for the next 48 hours, while Megan finalizes the evidence package for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. I nodded in agreement. If Trent thinks we are too busy fighting a public relations nightmare, he will not bother shredding his internal hard drives. I need 2 more days to map the offshore accounts connected to Apex Holdings. Go back to your house, Andre told Courtney, his tone all business now. Pack a bag. Act like you are hysterical. Tell your mother you are staying at a hotel because you cannot look at me. Give them exactly the reaction they expect. We handle the rest." Courtney stood up, clutching the red-stamped folder to her chest. "Consider it done." The meeting adjourned with a unified, lethal focus. I left Thomas's office and headed straight back to my secure workspace at my firm. The smear campaign was raging online, but I ignored my ringing phone and the frantic emails from my clients. Let Beatrice run her mouth. The truth was going to hit Chicago high society like a freight train, and I was going to be the one driving it. I unlocked my office door and stepped inside immediately, noticing a thick, glossy black envelope sitting squarely in the center of my desk. My assistant had already gone home for the day. The building's security was tight. Someone had paid a premium courier to hand-deliver this specific package directly to my workspace. I dropped my bag, walked over to the desk, and picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive cardstock. I slid my fingernail under the gold wax seal and pulled out the contents. It was a VIP invitation printed in embossed silver lettering. It was an exclusive pass to the highly anticipated, wildly expensive New Year's Eve gala hosted by the Chicago Financial Board. It was the event of the season, a room filled with the exact clients Beatrice was currently trying to turn against me. A small, cream-colored card fluttered out of the invitation and landed on my desk. I picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, loopy, and instantly recognizable. It was from Brittany Trent's mistress and the proud new owner of a stolen diamond tennis bracelet. I read the handwritten note, feeling a sharp, dangerous smile spread across my face. Come see what a real power couple looks like. While Courtney and Andre formulated a legal containment strategy with Thomas, I returned to my office to handle the digital fallout. The high society rumor mill had fully exploded. My phone rang incessantly. Beatrice was aggressively working her way through my client roster. She was leveraging her country club prestige, calling every CEO I contracted with to claim I was an unstable corporate spy engaged in a scandalous affair. 3 major clients suspended my contracts within the hour. I refused to argue online. Engaging with a narcissist's smear campaign only gave it oxygen. I ignored the notifications and walked to my desk where a thick, glossy black envelope rested squarely on my keyboard. A premium courier had bypassed building security to hand-deliver it directly to my workspace. I broke the gold wax seal. Inside was a VIP pass to the highly exclusive New Year's Eve gala hosted by the Chicago Financial Board. A small, cream-colored card fluttered out of the envelope and landed on my desk. The handwriting belonged to Brittany Trent's new mistress. I read the mocking note, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. Come see what a real power couple looks like. Trent was not just taking his mistress to a party, he was using the gala to officially announce the merger of his hedge fund with Arthur Kensington's massive real estate empire. Brittany's family portrayed themselves as Chicago royalty, dripping in old money and unshakable prestige. Beatrice worshipped the Kensington name. I pulled my keyboard forward and initiated a deep forensic dive into Vanguard Real Estate, Arthur Kensington's primary holding company. It took me exactly 12 minutes to shatter the illusion of wealth. The Kensingtons were not Chicago royalty. They were financially drowning. Arthur had leveraged every single commercial property in his portfolio with toxic high-interest mezzanine debt. His luxury buildings were hemorrhaging cash, defaulting on contractor payments, and facing a cascade of silent foreclosures. The designer gowns, the charity galas, and the country club memberships were entirely funded by a mountain of outstanding loans. Trent was bringing his stolen client funds to bail out Arthur, and Arthur was letting Trent use the Kensington name to fake his physical asset sheets. They were 2 sinking ships tying themselves together, hoping to look like a luxury yacht. I printed the Kensington debt ledgers just as Andre and Thomas walked into my office. I handed the financial disaster map to Thomas and pointed to the VIP invitation resting on my desk. They are announcing a fraudulent merger at the gala, I explained. Brittany thinks they are untouchable. She thinks her family's prestige will legitimize Trent's stolen money. Thomas picked up the heavy embossed invitation. He read the Kensington family crest stamped into the silver foil. For a long moment, the senior partner remained perfectly still. Then a dark, genuine chuckle escaped his lips. It was a low, ruthless sound. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. Arthur Kensington does not own the ballroom where this little party is being held, Thomas stated, his eyes gleaming with lethal amusement. My private equity board quietly acquired the distressed commercial debt on every single Kensington property last Tuesday. They are technically in default. Thomas pressed a button on his phone and lifted it to his ear. "Call my board of directors," he commanded, his voice radiating absolute power. "It is time the primary creditor of Brittany's family shows up to their little party." Thomas lowered his phone, the sharp click of the screen locking echoing in the sudden electrified silence of my office. He had just effectively checkmated the entire Kensington real estate empire with a single conversation. Arthur Kensington was a walking corpse in a tailored suit, completely unaware that his primary creditor was sitting in my office actively plotting his total financial ruin. My personal cell phone buzzed against the glass surface of my desk. It was a text message from an unlisted out-of-state burner number. I tapped the screen. A high-resolution image file downloaded, followed by a single line of text. "The future of Apex Holdings. See you at the gala." I opened the image. It was a black-and-white ultrasound sonogram. The unmistakable curve of a tiny spine and the fuzzy outline of a developing skull filled the frame. Brittany was pregnant. The strategy was sickeningly transparent. Trent was going to use the New Year's Eve gala to announce the merger between his hedge fund and the Kensington real estate empire, and he was going to cap the evening by announcing his new heir. He was going to stand in front of Chicago's wealthiest families, holding his pregnant mistress, and paint himself as the ultimate dedicated family man, while simultaneously framing me as the unstable, cheating ex-wife. It was a masterclass in narcissistic public relations. I did not throw the phone. I did not scream. The time for emotional reactions had officially expired, burned away by the sheer volume of Trent's betrayals. Instead, my training took over. Every digital file leaves a footprint, a hidden trail of data that tells a story the sender never intended to share. I plugged my phone directly into my encrypted forensic laptop and mirrored the screen. I dragged the ultrasound image file into my metadata extraction software. It is a routine process I use to authenticate digital invoices and verify electronic signatures. The program instantly stripped away the visual layer of the image, exposing the raw EXIF data embedded in the code. The text scrolled rapidly across my monitor before settling into a neat, undeniable list. Digital Forensic Extraction Report. Device used: Apple iPhone 14 Pro Max. Original capture date: October 14th of the previous year. Original capture time: 11:42 p.m. Location services enabled. GPS coordinates: 41.9028, north 87.6298 west. I stared at the screen, the breath completely freezing in my lungs. My blood turned to absolute ice. October 14th of the previous year was not a random date. It was the exact day I was admitted to Northwestern Memorial Hospital to be induced. I clearly remembered that night. I was lying in a sterile hospital bed, hooked up to fetal heart monitors, shivering from the epidural and terrified of the impending labor. Trent had been sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl chair next to me, scrolling through his phone. Around 10:30 p.m., he told me he needed to go back to our house to pack a proper overnight bag for me and secure the alarm system. He kissed my forehead, promised he would be back within an hour, and walked out the door. He did not return until well past 3 a.m. He blamed traffic and a dead car battery. I took the GPS coordinates from the metadata report and dropped them into the satellite mapping program on my secondary monitor. The map zoomed in rapidly, bypassing the downtown grid, sweeping over the northern suburbs, and dropping a bright red digital pin precisely on the roof of a house. It was my house. It was the marital home Trent and I had shared. The coordinates were highly specific. They did not just point to the property line. The latitude and longitude markers triangulated directly over the southwest corner of the second floor, the master bedroom. Trent had not just been having an affair. He had brought Brittany into our home. He had taken that ultrasound photo celebrating his new secret family, while lying in my bed, exactly while I was across the city, in a hospital room, bringing his actual daughter into the world. He had desecrated the absolute most vulnerable moment of my entire life. A cold, absolute stillness washed over me. The pain was gone. The shock was gone. What remained was a pure, highly concentrated fury that felt heavier than gravity. I did not just want Trent to go to prison anymore. I wanted to dismantle his entire existence down to the molecular level. I wanted to leave him with absolutely nothing. I turned away from the ultrasound image and pulled my keyboard forward. I opened the massive encrypted folder containing the Apex Holdings and Vanguard real estate merger documents. Trent and Arthur Kensington were attempting to fuse their two bankrupt empires together to create the illusion of solvency, but financial mergers of that magnitude require immense verified collateral. They needed a tangible, highly valuable asset to act as the anchor for the newly formed corporate entity. I started cross-referencing Arthur's defaulted commercial deeds against Trent's falsified client ledgers. I ran the numbers backwards, searching for the specific point of origin where the fraudulent capital was supposed to intersect with the toxic debt. I spent 4 hours tearing through the code, stripping away layers of legal jargon and offshore routing numbers. I ignored the setting sun outside my office window. I ignored the growing silence of the building. I hunted through the digital paper trail with the ruthless efficiency of an apex predator. At 8:15 p.m. I found it. It was buried deep within a subsidiary filing intentionally mislabeled as a standard corporate liability transfer. I pulled the document onto my main screen and magnified the text. It was a master guarantor agreement. Arthur Kensington had required a massive liquid cash deposit to secure his end of the merger, and Trent had provided the collateral by leveraging a secondary highly protected family trust. I looked at the primary signature line authorizing the transfer of $80 million in unsecured liability. It was not Trent's signature. It was not Arthur Kensington's signature. The glaring fatal anomaly in the merger document stared back at me in bold black ink. Beatrice had signed the guarantor agreement. She had quietly leveraged her own untouchable old money estate to fund her son's fraudulent merger, tying her personal fortune directly to a criminal enterprise. Beatrice had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her. I stared at the guarantor signature for a long, quiet minute. Beatrice had staked the family fortune on Trent's shiny new merger. But the collision of these two entities created a glaring mathematical paradox. I ran the algorithms again. The numbers refused to align. If Trent was broke, relying on stolen client capital to stay afloat, and Arthur Kensington was drowning in toxic mezzanine debt, where was the actual liquid cash? Who was funding this monumental merger? The answer blossomed across my monitors in a beautiful catastrophic display of mutual deception. There was no money. It was the ultimate high society grift. I started pulling Arthur Kensington's private credit reports, cross-referencing them against his daughter's extravagant spending habits. Brittany was parading around Chicago acting like an untouchable heiress, completely unaware that her father was weeks away from total insolvency. Trent was marrying Brittany because he believed Arthur's vast real estate empire would easily absorb his $4.5 million embezzlement deficit. Trent thought he was marrying into a massive, unshakable bailout. Arthur, however, had aggressively pursued the merger because he believed Trent's hedge fund possessed the massive liquid assets required to pay off his looming balloon payments. They were conning each other. Two bankrupt, desperate men mutually gold-digging one another, building a paper empire entirely out of toxic debt, stolen funds, and spectacular lies. And Beatrice, completely blinded by the prestige of the Kensington name, had proudly co-signed the disaster, putting her own pristine old money estate up as the sacrificial lamb to guarantee a vault of nothingness. I picked up my phone and dialed Andre. I did not bother with a greeting. "They are both entirely broke," I stated the moment he answered. "Trent and Arthur Kensington. They are running a reciprocal fraud, and your mother-in-law just handed us the keys to her kingdom to pay for it." Andre arrived at my office 20 minutes later, bringing Thomas along with a stack of blank federal injunction forms. When I explained the mechanics of the mutual con, Andre actually laughed out loud. It was a harsh, incredulous sound. We pushed two heavy desks together and immediately went to work. The sheer scale of this fraud required immediate airtight containment before either Trent or Arthur realized they were mutually bankrupt and attempted to flee the country. We spent the next 3 relentless hours drafting a comprehensive federal asset freeze request. This was not a simple localized civil injunction. We built a watertight multi-agency filing directed explicitly at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The request meticulously detailed the embezzlement from Apex Holdings, the fraudulent merger documents, the hidden toxic debt of Vanguard Real Estate, and the exact routing numbers of the Cayman shell accounts. We targeted Trent. We targeted Arthur Kensington. And with a deep settling sense of justice, we targeted Beatrice's personal estate, legally locking down the guarantor assets she had so arrogantly pledged. Andre reviewed the final draft, his eyes tracking the columns of undeniable forensic evidence. When this hits the federal docket tomorrow morning, it will instantly freeze every bank account, every property deed, and every credit line connected to these 3 names, Andre said, signing his name on the legal counsel authorization line. Trent will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone fund a lavish New Year's Eve gala. We transmitted the encrypted files directly to Thomas's secure server. Thomas had a federal judge on standby ready to review the injunction at dawn. The trap was set and the jaws were about to snap shut. It was past midnight when I finally packed up my laptop. The adrenaline that had fueled my deep forensic dive was slowly giving way to a bone-deep physical exhaustion. I locked up the office and drove back to my modest 1-bedroom apartment. It lacked the vaulted ceilings and imported marble floors of the marital home Trent had turned into an active crime scene, but it was mine. It was paid for with clean money and honest work, and I had never felt safer than I did within those walls. I unlocked my door, stepped inside the dark entryway, and dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter. I reached for the light switch. Before my fingers could brush the plastic plate, a heavy, aggressive pounding rattled my front door. It was not a casual knock. It was a violent, demanding strike that shook the doorframe. I froze. I did not call out. I walked silently back to the door and peered through the brass peephole. Beatrice stood in my dimly lit hallway. She was wearing a floor-length cashmere coat, her face twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic fury. Flanking her was a massive, broad-shouldered man in a dark tactical jacket. He stood with his hands resting casually near his waist, staring dead-eyed at my door. He had the unmistakable menacing posture of a high-priced, off-the-books private investigator. Beatrice leaned close to the wood, her voice dropping into a vicious, commanding hiss. "Open this door immediately. Megan or my associate will break it down." I unbolted the heavy deadbolt and pulled the door open, leaving my hand firmly on the brass knob. The private investigator immediately stepped his heavy boot over the threshold, attempting to use his sheer physical mass to force the door wider. He expected me to shrink back in fear. He expected the intimidated, obedient housewife Beatrice had spent years conditioning me to be. I did not move a single inch. I looked dead into the investigator's flat, expressionless eyes. "Remove your foot from my home," I commanded, my voice dropping to a cold, lethal register. "If you attempt to breach this doorway again, I will call the Chicago Police Report a home invasion and ensure your private security license is permanently revoked before sunrise." The large man hesitated, his brow furrowing in surprise. He glanced over his shoulder at Beatrice. She let out an exasperated sigh and waved a dismissive, leather-gloved hand. "Wait in the hallway, Marcus." Beatrice ordered, her tone dripping with aristocratic annoyance. "I will handle my daughter-in-law. This will only take a moment." Marcus stepped back into the corridor, his jaw tight with silent frustration. Beatrice swept past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. She stood in the center of my small living room, her cashmere coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She looked around at my modest furniture and simple decor with an expression of profound theatrical disgust, treating my home as if it were a biohazard zone. I closed the door, leaving Marcus in the hall, and turned to face the matriarch of the family that had tried to destroy me. "You have lost your mind, Megan." Beatrice began, refusing to sit down. "You are staging a pathetic public temper tantrum, and it ends tonight. The New Year's Eve gala is tomorrow. Trent is making a monumental announcement that will elevate this family to the highest echelon of Chicago society. I will not allow a bitter, financially unstable woman to cast a shadow over my son's triumph. She opened her designer handbag and pulled out a pristine leather-bound checkbook. She retrieved a gold fountain pen and quickly scribbled across the paper. With a sharp, aggressive motion, she tore the check free and threw it onto my small dining table. It landed face up. $50,000, Beatrice stated, lifting her chin to look down her nose at me. That is more money than you make in a year printing your little spreadsheets. It is enough to cover the first year of rent in this squalid apartment. I looked at the check, then back at Beatrice, maintaining absolute silence. My lack of reaction unsettled her, but her arrogance pushed her forward. There are conditions, of course, Beatrice continued, crossing her arms. Tomorrow morning you will sign a comprehensive ironclad, non-disclosure agreement drafted by our corporate attorneys. You will publicly retract your ridiculous financial allegations. More importantly, you will grant Trent full, uncontested physical and legal custody of Lily. My blood turned to ice, but I kept my face entirely impassive. Lily is a legacy, Beatrice declared, her voice hardening. She belongs in a secure, affluent environment, surrounded by the finest tutors and nannies our money can buy. She does not belong in a cramped apartment with an unstable mother who is currently unraveling in the public eye. You will take the money, you will surrender the child, and you will walk away, or I will personally ensure you never work in the financial sector again. Beatrice smiled, a thin, vicious curve of her lips. She truly believed she had won. She believed money was the ultimate weapon, and she assumed I was desperate enough to fold. I walked slowly over to the dining table. I picked up the check, holding it by the edges. Beatrice's smile widened, anticipating my surrender. Instead, I looked her directly in the eyes, gripped the heavy paper, and ripped it squarely in half. I placed the pieces together and tore them again, then again, reducing her $50,000 bribe to meaningless confetti. I let the shredded paper fall from my fingers, scattering across the hardwood floor at her feet. Beatrice gasped, stepping back as if I had struck her. Are you entirely insane? I closed the distance between us, stepping directly into her personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume was overwhelming, but I did not flinch. You think you are untouchable because of your name? I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of an executioner. You think your old money estate protects you? I leaned in, bringing my face inches from her ear. Account number 749-22-801. I whispered, enunciating every single digit with lethal precision, held at the Grand Cayman National Depository. Beatrice stopped breathing. Her entire body went completely rigid. I know exactly how you hid $12 million from the Internal Revenue Service over the last decade. I continued, my voice steady and unforgiving. I know you used that specific illegal offshore tax evasion account to guarantee Trent's fraudulent merger with Arthur Kensington. I saw the master guarantor agreement, Beatrice. I saw your signature. You tied your entire personal fortune to a criminal enterprise. Beatrice stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the rug. The aristocratic commanding matriarch completely vanished. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a pure, unadulterated terror that bordered on hysteria. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked, ragged wheeze escaped her throat. The federal asset freeze hits the docket at dawn, I stated coldly. Your accounts are gone. Your estate is gone. Your pristine reputation is going to be shredded on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Get out of my apartment. Beatrice did not say another word. She turned and scrambled for the door, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn the deadbolt. She threw the door open, grabbed Marcus by the sleeve of his tactical jacket, and practically dragged him down the hallway toward the elevator. I stood in the doorway watching her retreat. As the elevator doors slid open, I heard Beatrice fumbling with her cell phone. She was hyperventilating, her voice echoing down the empty corridor as she frantically dialed her son. Trent. Beatrice screamed into the phone, her voice cracking with absolute panic. Trent, she knows. Megan knows about the Cayman accounts. She saw the guarantor signature. She is going to the federal authorities in the morning. I stepped back inside and closed my door, locking it with a heavy, satisfying click. Miles away in his luxury downtown penthouse, Trent listened to his mother's hysterical sobbing. The phone slipped from his ear. The master plan he had spent months orchestrating was collapsing in real time. The gala was tomorrow night. The merger announcement was the only thing keeping his creditors at bay. If the feds froze his assets at dawn, he would be arrested before he even put on his tuxedo. Trent looked at the unexecuted merger contracts sitting on his glass desk. Arthur Kensington was not supposed to sign them until the gala, but Trent was out of time. He was cornered, desperate and terrified. He picked up a heavy gold pen, turned to the final page of the contract, and decided to illegally forge Arthur Kensington's signature 24 hours early. I arrived at Thomas's law firm before the sun even crested the Chicago skyline. The adrenaline from my midnight confrontation with Beatrice still hummed in my veins, but it was abruptly replaced by a sharp, metallic dread the moment Andre walked into the conference room. His usually immaculate suit looked slightly rumpled, and his jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his ear. "We have a massive problem," Andre stated, dropping his heavy leather briefcase onto the mahogany table. "The federal judge assigned to our asset freeze petition just kicked it back. He is refusing to sign the injunction without a mandatory 30-day review period." A 30-day review period for an emergency federal freeze was unheard of, especially with the sheer volume of forensic evidence we had provided. It was a deliberate, calculated stall tactic. Trent did not need 30 days. With the forged merger documents likely already in motion after Beatrice's panicked phone call the night before, Trent only needed 24 hours to execute the transfer, cash out Arthur Kensington's remaining liquid assets, and disappear on a private jet before anyone realized the vaults were completely empty. "Who is the judge?" I demanded, already pulling my encrypted laptop from my bag. "Judge Robert Caldwell." Thomas answered, stepping into the room with a grim expression. "He is a senior federal judge, highly respected and practically untouchable." I typed Caldwell's name into the regional social registry database. Within 3 seconds, a high-resolution photograph populated my screen. It was a candid shot from an exclusive charity golf tournament held at the Kensington Country Club last summer. Standing shoulder to shoulder on the putting green, holding crystal tumblers of scotch and grinning like they owned the world, were Arthur Kensington Trent and Judge Robert Caldwell. "He is not just a judge," I said, turning the screen so Andre and Thomas could see the image. "He is Trent's golfing buddy. Beatrice must have made a secondary phone call last night after she fled my apartment. They pulled a massive high-level favor to block the filing." Andre ran a hand over his face in frustration. "If Caldwell sits on this file, Trent successfully executes the fraudulent merger tonight at the gala. By the time the 30 days are up, the money, Trent and Brittany will be ghosts. We are entirely out of legal maneuvers." I looked at the photograph of the 3 men laughing. Trent always left a mess. He was arrogant, sloppy, and fundamentally believed that rules did not apply to him. If he was pulling a favor of this magnitude from a federal judge, he had to be paying for it. "We are out of traditional legal maneuvers." I corrected, my fingers already flying over the keyboard. "But we are not out of forensic options. Buy me 4 hours." I locked myself in a glass-walled office and initiated a deep, invasive dive into Judge Caldwell's financial history. Federal judges undergo rigorous financial scrutiny, so a direct, traceable bribe was impossible. Trent was reckless, but he was not suicidal. The money had to be moving through a secondary, heavily anonymized channel. I bypassed Caldwell's personal bank accounts entirely and targeted his recent retention election campaign. I deployed a specialized scraping algorithm designed to track dark money through political action committees. The software systematically cross-referenced every single corporate donation made to Caldwell's campaign against the encrypted ledgers I had pulled from Trent's hedge fund. For 3 brutal hours, I stared at scrolling columns of alphanumeric routing data, tracing shell companies back to holding firms, which linked to offshore trusts. It was a digital labyrinth designed to exhaust and confuse anyone trying to follow the money. But I knew Trent's specific coding habits. I knew exactly how he structured his false ledgers to hide his tracks. At exactly 11:45 in the morning, the algorithm flagged a massive, fatal collision of data. A supposedly independent super PAC that had aggressively funded Caldwell's last election campaign received a sequence of anonymous high-dollar donations. The routing numbers on those donations matched the exact Cayman Island offshore accounts Trent had been using to hide his embezzled client funds. Trent had illegally financed a federal judge's political career using stolen money, and the digital fingerprints were permanently burned into the banking metadata. I printed the routing tree, highlighted the undeniable financial intersection in bright yellow ink, and slammed the folder onto Andre's desk. "Take this directly to Caldwell's chambers," I instructed, feeling a cold, predatory satisfaction settling deep in my chest. "Do not file it through the clerk. Do not request a hearing. Walk into his office, put this on his desk, and tell him he has exactly 5 minutes to recuse himself before we forward this entire packet to the Department of Justice Public Corruption Unit." Andre's eyes widened as he scanned the forensic report. A sharp, dangerous smile spread across his face. He grabbed the folder, adjusted his tie, and marched out of the firm. The wait was agonizing. I paced the length of the conference room, calculating every possible variable, every countermove Trent or the judge might attempt. If Caldwell called our bluff, the entire strategy would collapse. 45 minutes later, my phone lit up. It was Andre. He did not even try to argue. Andre said, his voice vibrating with adrenaline. The moment he saw the Cayman routing numbers, all the color completely drained from his face. He looked like he was going to vomit right on his mahogany desk. He signed an immediate permanent recusal order and physically handed our asset freeze petition over to the duty judge down the hall. "Who is the new judge?" I asked, holding my breath. "Judge Sarah Lynn," Andre replied. "She is a former SEC prosecutor. She has absolutely zero patience for financial fraud, zero ties to Chicago high society, and she despises old money corruption." 10 minutes later, Andre walked back into the law firm holding a heavy stack of federal documents. The top page bore the official embossed seal of the United States District Court. Judge Lynn had reviewed my forensic mapping of the Vanguard real estate toxic debt and Trent's embezzled Cayman accounts. She had seen the undeniable proof of the impending fraudulent merger. She did not just approve our request. She bypassed standard protocols entirely and signed the most aggressive, sweeping federal asset freeze I had ever seen. "It is done," Andre stated, placing the signed order on the table. "Every bank account, every offshore trust, every real estate deed, and every line of credit attached to Trent Arthur Kensington and Beatrice's personal estate is officially locked down by the federal government." I stared at the judge's signature, a profound sense of vindication washing over me. "When does the freeze execute?" I asked. Andre looked at the digital timestamp stamped on the bottom of the order. His smile turned absolutely ruthless. "Judge Lynn scheduled the electronic execution to trigger at the exact moment maximum societal damage will be inflicted," Andre explained softly. "The freeze hits the international banking servers tonight, exactly at midnight, right as the ball drops at the New Year's Eve gala." The biting Chicago wind whipped across the pristine pavement as our black SUV pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel. Valets scrambled to open the doors, their breath pluming in the freezing air. I stepped out into the night. I was not wearing the modest, sensible clothes of a discarded corporate wife. I wore a tailored, floor-length emerald gown that belonged in a boardroom just as much as a ballroom. I was not here to blend in. I was here to execute a corporate death sentence. Courtney stepped out beside me. She looked like a vengeful queen draped in silver silk, her expression carved from absolute ice. She was preparing to watch her own mother and brother fall into federal custody, and she did not possess a single ounce of pity. Thomas and Andre flanked us, projecting the kind of lethal, untouchable authority that only high-powered corporate attorneys can manifest. We did not speak. We did not need to. We walked through the rotating brass doors and marched directly toward the grand ballroom. The lobby was a sea of excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the imported marble floors. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the roar of Chicago's financial elite mingling behind the massive oak doors of the main event space. We reached the primary checkpoint. 4 private security guards built like linebackers and wearing discreet earpieces formed a solid wall in front of the ballroom entrance. The head of security, a man with a thick neck and a clipboard, held up a heavy hand. "I am sorry," he stated, his voice flat and authoritative. "This is a private closed event. Beatrice explicitly provided a restricted access list. You are not on it. In fact, she gave us your photograph with strict orders to have you escorted off the property immediately. He reached for the radio clipped to his belt. He never even got to press the button. Andre stepped forward, completely invading the guard's personal space. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He simply radiated the kind of terrifying legal menace that makes people instinctively back away. Andre reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, blue-backed legal portfolio. The embossed seal of the United States District Court caught the light of the chandeliers. I am Andre Vance, Senior Counsel. Andre stated his words, clipping through the air like gunfire. Behind me is Thomas Sterling, managing partner of Sterling and Vance. You are currently obstructing the physical delivery of a Class A federal injunction. If you do not remove your hand from that radio and step aside this exact second, I will have federal marshals on site in 4 minutes to arrest you and your entire team for felony obstruction of justice. The guard froze. He looked at the heavy federal seal, then up at Andre's unblinking gaze, and finally at Thomas, who was watching the exchange with an expression of mild, lethal amusement. The guard swallowed hard. He lowered his hand and took a slow step backward. The rest of the security detail immediately parted, clearing the path to the heavy oak doors. Open them, Andre commanded. The guards pulled the heavy brass handles. The doors swung wide, unleashing a wall of sound and light. The ballroom was an absolute masterpiece of fraudulent opulence. 10-foot ice sculptures flanked a massive champagne tower. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of caviar. The room was packed with hundreds of investors, real estate tycoons, and socialites, all completely oblivious to the fact that the two men hosting this lavish display were entirely bankrupt. We did not stand in the back. We did not wait in the shadows. We formed a tight line and marched straight down the center aisle. The crowd instinctively parted for us. Thomas carried a natural gravity that demanded space, and Courtney's icy glare silenced anyone who tried to step in our path. At the far end of this ballroom, a raised stage was bathed in bright spotlights. Trent was already standing there holding a microphone. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his teeth gleaming as he flashed his signature charismatic smile. Brittany stood right next to him. She was wearing a clinging silver designer gown specifically chosen to emphasize the slight newly announced curve of her stomach. She rested her hand delicately on her waist, looking out at the crowd with an expression of profound, arrogant triumph. They were playing the roles of the ultimate power couple perfectly. Trent tapped the microphone. A sharp squeal of feedback cut through the chatter, silencing the massive room. Welcome, everyone! Trent's voice boomed over the speakers, smooth and practiced. Tonight is not just about celebrating the new year. It is about celebrating legacy. It is about the future. Tonight, I am incredibly proud to officially announce the merger between my firm Apex Holdings and the legendary Vanguard real estate empire. A wave of polite applause rippled through the front rows. Arthur Kensington was standing near the stage, puffing his chest out, completely unaware that his commercial properties were already owned by the man walking down the aisle toward him. Together, Trent continued, placing his arm around Brittany's waist. We are building a foundation that will last for generations. A foundation built on trust, family, and unshakable strength. We reached the front of the stage. Beatrice was standing in the VIP section, directly in our line of sight. She was wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than my previous house, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. She was smiling up at her son, basking in the glow of the fraudulent empire she had just illegally guaranteed with her offshore tax evasion accounts. Then she turned her head. Beatrice made direct, unavoidable eye contact with me. I did not break my gaze. I simply offered her a cold, terrifyingly calm smile. The color instantly vanished from Beatrice's face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Her jaw dropped. Her fingers went completely slack. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her hand. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, violent crash, sending a shower of glass and expensive alcohol across the shoes of the surrounding investors. The sudden noise echoed through the silent room, cutting Trent off mid-sentence. Beatrice pointed a violently trembling finger directly at my face. She lost every single ounce of her aristocratic composure, her voice tearing out of her throat in a ragged, hysterical shriek. "Guards!" Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing off the gilded ceilings. "Get them out! Arrest them for trespassing right now!" 4 massive security guards in black suits lunged forward, closing in from the perimeter of the stage. Their hands reached for their tactical radios, their eyes fixed directly on me and Courtney. The crowd of elite investors gasped, stepping back to create a wide circle around us. The scent of expensive perfumes mixed with a sudden palpable wave of panic. Arthur Kensington stood near the front row, his jaw slacked in confusion, watching his highly publicized gala descend into madness. Before the lead guard could even extend his thick arm to grab my shoulder, Andre stepped cleanly into his path. Andre did not raise his hands. He simply lifted the heavy blue-backed federal portfolio and pressed the embossed seal directly into the center of the guard's chest. Federal asset freeze and cease and desist order. Andre stated, his voice carrying the lethal authority of a judge handing down an execution sentence. Signed at exactly 11:45 this morning by United States District Judge Sarah Lynn. You are currently looking at a federal mandate. If you lay a single finger on my clients or attempt to forcibly remove us from this venue, you are actively obstructing a federal investigation. The FBI Financial Task Force is waiting 3 blocks away in unmarked vehicles. Do you want me to make the call and have you arrested in front of Chicago's elite? The guard froze. He looked down at the gold foil court seal, his face rapidly draining of color. He glanced past Andre to Thomas, who was watching the exchange with an expression of mild, lethal amusement. The guard swallowed hard. He slowly raised his hands in surrender, stepping back and sharply signaling for the other 3 guards to stand down. They immediately melted back into the shadows of the ballroom, recognizing legal suicide when they saw it abandoning Beatrice completely. Beatrice stood rigidly in the VIP section, her chest heaving as she stared at her retreating security detail. She looked back at us, her aristocratic mask cracking violently to reveal the terrified, desperate woman underneath. She opened her mouth to issue another shrill command, perhaps to call the police herself, but Courtney moved first. Courtney stepped away from my side and walked directly up to her mother. The silver silk of her gown caught the stage lights, making her look like an avenging angel of absolute destruction. She did not yell. She did not scream. She spoke with a quiet, icy precision that cut through the hushed murmurs of the ballroom like a surgical scalpel. "You are pathetic," Beatrice Courtney said, her voice dripping with profound disgust. Beatrice gasped, clutching her diamond necklace as if it could shield her. "How dare you speak to me that way in public? I am your mother. You will show respect, or I will permanently cut you out of the Kensington Family Trust before the clock strikes midnight." Courtney let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It echoed in the massive room, chilling and completely devoid of any joy. It was the sound of a daughter who had spent her entire life living in the shadow of a golden boy finally stepping into the light. "The trust fund is gone," Mother Courtney stated, leaning in close so Beatrice could not look away. "I know everything. I know exactly how you manipulated grandfather's accounts when his dementia started setting in. I know you funneled his generational wealth, the money he built with his own 2 hands, directly into Trent's failing hedge fund to cover his catastrophic losses. You sacrificed the entire family legacy to protect your precious son from his own staggering incompetence." Beatrice stumbled backward, her designer heel catching on a stray piece of shattered glass from her dropped champagne flute. The matriarchal superiority vanished, replaced by sheer panic. "You have no proof of that," Beatrice stammered, her voice shaking so violently she could barely articulate the words. "You are making up vicious, disgusting lies to humiliate me in front of my peers." "I have 32 gigabytes of offshore routing data," Courtney replied coldly, her gaze unblinking. "Megan traced every single dollar you stole from grandfather's estate. We followed the dark money through the shell companies straight to your Cayman Island accounts. I took that raw data to the district attorney this afternoon. I have officially filed criminal charges against you for elder and familial financial abuse. The federal investigators are already drafting the arrest warrants. You are ruined. Beatrice covered her mouth with both hands, a strangled animalistic sob tearing from her throat. She looked wildly around the room, making eye contact with her wealthy friends and socialite peers. They were all staring at her with undisguised horror and judgment. The social execution she had spent her life terrified of was happening right now, broadcast live to everyone she deemed important. But Trent refused to go down without a fight. He was standing on the brightly lit stage, cornered, desperate, and watching his meticulously crafted empire burn in real time. Instead of surrendering to the overwhelming evidence, his extreme narcissism took the wheel. He gripped the microphone stand, his knuckles turning stark white under the intense stage lighting, and let out a loud booming laugh that violently startled everyone in the room. Trent pulled the microphone off the stand, projecting his voice over the entire ballroom, forcing a wide, charismatic smile onto his face, as if this were all an elaborate, scheduled performance. Ladies and gentlemen, please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies for this bizarre interruption, Trent announced, waving his free hand dismissively at us. You are currently witnessing a rather pathetic display of family jealousy. My ex-wife and my estranged sister are simply hysterical. They have spent years resenting my professional success, and now they are staging this desperate theatrical tantrum to try and ruin the greatest night of my career. He reached out and grabbed Brittany by the waist, pulling her tightly against his side. She looked absolutely terrified, her eyes darting between Trent and the federal portfolio in Andre's hand, but she managed to plaster a stiff, artificial smile onto her face for the captive audience. Do not let their desperate delusions distract you from the truth of tonight. Trent continued, his voice dripping with arrogant, unchecked confidence. This merger with Arthur Kensington is a $50 million triumph. It is ironclad, it is legally binding, and there is absolutely nothing these two hysterical women can do to stop it. Trent gripped the microphone tighter, stepping to the very edge of the stage. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. He needed the crowd to believe his reality. He needed Arthur Kensington to ignore the federal agents waiting outside. Look at her. Trent sneered, his voice echoing through the massive ballroom, dripping with aristocratic contempt. Just look at her. She is a broke, bitter public school accountant. That is all she has ever been. She spent our entire marriage calculating grocery budgets and clipping coupons, utterly incapable of understanding high-level finance. And now that I am stepping into a completely different stratosphere of wealth, now that I am marrying a woman of actual pedigree and substance, she stages a pathetic disruption because she cannot handle her own mediocrity. Trent pulled Brittany closer. Brittany tilted her chin up, offering me a look of profound, devastating pity. She played the role of the besieged, elegant heiress, perfectly placing a manicured hand over her heart, as if my presence alone offended her delicate sensibilities. I did not flinch. I did not shout back. I stood perfectly still in my emerald gown, surrounded by the wealthiest investors in Chicago, and let Trent dig his grave as deep as he possibly could. He was banking on the fact that these people respected presentation over substance. He assumed I would shrink under the weight of his public humiliation, just as Beatrice had conditioned me to do for a decade. He was entirely wrong. I slowly raised my right hand and looked up past the crystal chandeliers, directing my gaze to the tinted glass of the audiovisual control booth on the mezzanine level. A crisp $100 bill, a flash drive, and a brief conversation with a highly underpaid, deeply disgruntled hotel technician 2 hours prior was the greatest financial investment I had ever made in my entire life. I gave a sharp, deliberate nod. The sweeping, triumphant orchestral music that had been playing softly in the background cut out with a harsh, violent screech. The massive 50-foot LED screens behind Trent and Brittany violently flickered. The towering gold-embossed logo for the Apex and Vanguard merger instantly vanished into blackness. The sudden visual shift caused a collective gasp to ripple through the ballroom. Trent stopped speaking, his charismatic smile faltering as the stage was suddenly bathed in the harsh, glaring white light of a spreadsheet projection. If I am nothing but a broke public school accountant, Trent, my voice rang out cold and carrying perfectly through the dead silence of the room, then why am I not the one listed on these specific insolvency filings? Trent whipped around to look at the massive screens. I had instructed the technician to format the display perfectly. The towering screen was split directly down the middle, showcasing two distinct unredacted certified financial documents side by side in razor-sharp, high-definition font. On the left side of the screen was the true, unfiltered internal ledger for Apex Holdings. It was not the sanitized, fraudulent prospectus Trent had handed to Arthur Kensington. It was the raw data I had decrypted. The numbers were highlighted in glaring aggressive red. It showed zero liquid assets. It showed margin calls stacked so high the firm was functionally dead. At the very bottom, Trent's personal net worth was displayed in bold text, revealing a catastrophic personal deficit of negative $4.5 million. But the right side of the screen was my absolute masterpiece. It displayed a sealed Chapter 7 federal bankruptcy filing from the state of Delaware. The petitioner's name was blown up to a towering height. It was the estate of Brittany's family, the supposedly legendary, untouchable old money dynasty that Trent had been bragging about all evening. The filing documented decades of gross mismanagement, liquidated trust funds, and unpaid federal taxes, culminating in a devastating, undeniable insolvency of negative $30 million. The silence in the ballroom shattered. It was replaced by a chaotic, deafening uproar. Arthur Kensington, standing in the front row, dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the marble, but no one even noticed the sound. His face turned an alarming shade of purple as he stared at the red ink on the left side of the screen, realizing instantly that he was minutes away from signing his generational real estate empire over to a man who did not have a single dime to his name. The wealthy investors around him began shouting, pulling out their phones, realizing their pending investments were tied to a monumental fraud. On stage, the illusion of the power couple violently imploded. Brittany stared at the left side of the screen, her eyes tracking the negative $4 million deficit attached to Trent's name. Her pristine, glowing facade completely disintegrated. She realized in a fraction of a second that the billionaire savior she thought she had trapped was entirely bankrupt. Trent was staring at the right side of the screen. He looked at the $30 million bankruptcy filing attached to Brittany's family name. The heiress whose fictional trust fund he had planned to leverage to cover his toxic debt was a complete fabrication. Trent dropped Brittany's hand as if her skin was burning him. He backed away from her, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Brittany lunged forward, her manicured hands grabbing the silk lapels of Trent's custom tuxedo. She ripped the live microphone out of his hand, her voice echoing over the speakers in a shrill, hysterical shriek. "You are broke!" Brittany screamed, the sound tearing through the massive ballroom. "You lied to me. You told me you had $50 million in liquid capital. You do not even have a house." Trent violently shoved her backward, his own fury boiling over into absolute madness. He ripped the microphone back, his voice cracking with panic and vitriol. "You parasitic fraud!" Trent roared back at her, spittle flying from his lips as he pointed frantically at the massive bankruptcy document projected behind them. "You told me your family trust was guaranteeing the Vanguard merger. You told me you had offshore capital. You have absolutely nothing. You are worthless." They circled each other on the brightly lit stage, screaming vicious, humiliating accusations into the live microphone, tearing each other apart piece by piece, while the absolute elite of Chicago watched the destruction in stunned, captivated horror. The chaotic screams echoing from the stage were deafening, but they were quickly drowned out by a new violent commotion erupting from the center of the ballroom. A heavy-set man with a flushed face and a perfectly tailored tuxedo was aggressively shoving his way through the crowd of panicked investors. It was Brittany's father. His expression was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had just watched his family's heavily guarded, deeply shameful financial ruin broadcast in high definition to the most powerful people in Chicago. His manufactured empire of old money and prestige was currently burning to the ground on the 50-foot LED screens, and he needed a blood sacrifice to salvage his pride. He locked eyes with me. He charged forward, his heavy footsteps thudding against the marble, his fists clenched tight at his sides. He treated me as if I were a common criminal who had just broken into his pristine, untouchable world. "Turn those screens off right now," he roared, his voice booming over the chaos of the room, spittle flying from his lips. "Turn them off, or I will personally see you locked in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life." I stood perfectly still, my posture completely relaxed. I did not take a single step backward. I did not break eye contact. "You are going to prison for this," he screamed, stopping just inches from my face. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "This is criminal defamation. This is corporate sabotage and illegal espionage. You hacked private financial records and displayed them to the public. I am calling the Chicago police. I am calling the FBI. I will bury you under an avalanche of litigation so massive you will not even exist by the time my lawyers are done with you." He reached into his jacket pocket, wildly fumbling for his phone, entirely convinced he still held the upper hand. He genuinely believed his wealth and his generational name shielded him from consequence. He thought he was intimidating a helpless, bitter ex-wife who had finally gone off the deep end. He had absolutely no idea who he was actually dealing with. Before his fingers could even dial a single digit, a massive shadow fell over us. Thomas stepped out from the periphery of our group. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator circling its prey. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice or attempt to match the frantic energy of the room. He simply stepped directly into the space between me and Brittany's father, completely cutting off the man's aggressive advance like a wall of solid steel. The air in the ballroom seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. Thomas reached up and calmly unbuttoned his heavy cashmere overcoat. He slipped it off his broad shoulders with fluid practiced precision and handed it silently to Andre. He stood there in his immaculate charcoal three-piece suit, radiating a kind of dark, terrifying authority that suffocated the remaining noise in the room. Brittany's father looked up, his chest heaving, ready to unleash another volley of aggressive legal threats. But the words died instantly in his throat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The furious crimson flush on his face completely vanished, replaced by a sickly ashen gray. His eyes widened in sheer paralyzing terror. His hand, still clutching his expensive cell phone, began to shake violently against his side. He recognized the man standing in front of him. Every corrupt executive, every over-leveraged billionaire, and every desperate socialite in the financial underworld knew exactly who Thomas was. He was the invisible hand that held the debt of the elite. He was the master of the shadow ledgers, the man who could wipe out a corporate dynasty with a single stroke of his pen. Brittany's father took a staggering step backward. His knees physically gave out under the weight of his sudden realization. He dropped hard onto the polished marble floor. The heavy thud of his knees hitting the stone echoed through the breathless silence of the ballroom. He stared up at Thomas, his eyes wide with a pleading, pathetic desperation that stripped away every ounce of his former arrogance. "Mr. Thomas," he gasped, his voice nothing more than a ragged, terrified whisper. "I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know she was with you." Thomas did not offer him a single fraction of an inch of mercy. He did not even look down at the man kneeling in the glass and spilled champagne at his feet. Instead, Thomas stepped around him and began walking slowly up the velvet stairs toward the brightly lit stage. The crowd parted for him, as if he were a king walking to his throne. Trent and Brittany had stopped their vicious screaming match. They were frozen in the center of the stage, watching the most powerful man in the room approach them. Trent's charismatic arrogance had completely evaporated. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. Thomas reached the center of the stage. He extended his hand. Trent, completely paralyzed by a primal fear, mechanically handed over the microphone. Thomas turned to face the vast sea of Chicago's elite. He held the microphone with absolute, unshakable confidence. "Let us clarify exactly what is happening here tonight." Thomas began, his deep, commanding voice vibrating through the massive speakers, demanding absolute attention. He looked directly down at Brittany's father, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, completely unable to stand. "Your holding company owes my firm $30 million. Thomas stated, his words landing like physical blows against the silent room. "You have spent the last decade defaulting on offshore loans, hiding behind shell companies, and leveraging a family name that lost its actual value 30 years ago. I bought your debt. I own your liabilities. And as of this exact moment, you are entirely liquidated. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Brittany let out a sharp, horrified sob, covering her face with her trembling hands, as the reality of her total destitution finally crashed down on her. The fairy tale was dead. Then Thomas slowly turned his head. He locked his cold, unblinking gaze onto Trent. Trent shrank back, his hands shaking at his sides. He looked desperately toward the exit signs, calculating his chances of running into the night, but the heavy oak doors were now blocked by federal agents wearing dark windbreakers who had silently slipped into the room to execute the asset freeze. And Trent Thomas said softly, but the high-end sound system amplified the lethal, unforgiving edge in his voice. You have spent the last 5 years building an empire on lies, embezzlement, and the systematic destruction of the people who trusted you. You thought you were the smartest man in the room. You thought your slick presentations and your stolen money made you untouchable. Thomas took a slow, deliberate step closer to Trent, invading his space, just as Trent had invaded mine for years. You also thought you were extremely clever when you hid your assets through an anonymous real estate trust to avoid tax liability. Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly register. That offshore LLC that holds the deed to your luxury downtown penthouse, the one you used to hide your wealth during your fraudulent divorce proceedings. Trent's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. He stopped breathing entirely, realizing exactly what was about to happen. I own it, Thomas stated, delivering the final fatal blow with absolute precision. I bought the parent company 3 days ago. You do not own a penthouse, Trent. You do not own a single square foot of property in this city. You are currently a trespasser in a home that belongs to me. Thomas paused, letting the absolute destruction of Trent's ego settle over the stage. He looked back down at me, standing tall and unbroken in the center of the ballroom. His expression softened for a fraction of a second, filled with profound protective pride, before he turned his lethal focus back to the trembling man in front of him. You threw my daughter and my granddaughter out into the freezing snow on Christmas Eve, Thomas declared, his voice ringing with the heavy finality of a judge passing an execution sentence. You tried to destroy her life so you could fund your pathetic, fraudulent existence. He dropped the microphone onto the hardwood stage. It hit the ground with a loud, reverberating crack that made half the room flinch. Tonight I collect. The deafening crack of the microphone hitting the hardwood stage shattered the paralyzed silence of the grand ballroom. The spell was instantly broken. Raw, unfiltered panic flooded the opulent space. It was a stampede of silk and diamonds. The incredibly wealthy investors who had been applauding Trent's genius just minutes ago now scrambled over each other to get away from the stage, terrified that the sheer proximity to his massive fraud might somehow infect them. Arthur Kensington was already shouting into his cell phone, flanked by his own lawyers desperately trying to sever any ties to the Apex merger before the news hit the morning markets. The illusion of the Vanguard Empire was dead. Trent did not freeze. Self-preservation took the wheel. He looked at the federal agents standing shoulder to shoulder, blocking the main oak doors. He looked at Thomas standing like a monolith in the center of the stage. He looked at Brittany, who was currently curled into a ball on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, as her fairy tale life dissolved into federal ruin. Trent made his choice. He abandoned his bride. He abandoned his mother. He turned on his heel, vaulted off the side of the stage, and sprinted toward the catering access doors, hidden behind a heavy velvet drape. He shoved a terrified waiter violently out of his path, sending a silver tray of caviar and crystal flutes crashing to the marble floor, sprinting blindly toward the kitchen exit. He never made it past the swinging doors. Andre had not just brought a court order, he had brought the entire Federal Financial Crimes Division. The service doors were violently kicked open from the other side. A dozen FBI agents wearing dark tactical vests over their dress shirts swarmed into the narrow catering corridor. The lead agent tackled Trent straight into a stainless steel prep station. The heavy thud of Trent's perfectly tailored tuxedo hitting the industrial kitchen wall echoed back into the main ballroom. This was not a random raid, this was a surgical, perfectly orchestrated strike. Megan had handed the FBI the case on an absolute silver platter. Every single decrypted ledger, every hidden offshore account, every forged signature, and every illegal wire transfer was already printed, verified, and sitting on a federal prosecutor's desk. Megan had spent weeks turning complex financial data into a lethal weapon. Andre had spent the last 48 hours ensuring the warrants were absolutely ironclad. There were no loopholes left. There was no bail coming. Back in the main ballroom, the chaos escalated into a frenzy. More agents poured through the primary entrance, moving with calculated, overwhelming efficiency. The lead investigator marched straight toward the VIP section, where Brittany's father was still kneeling on the floor in a puddle of expensive champagne, completely shattered by Thomas's revelation. "Stand up," the agent commanded, grabbing the older man by the arm and hauling him roughly to his feet. Brittany's father did not resist. All the aggressive bluster, all the arrogant threats of corporate litigation and police action had completely evaporated. He looked like a hollow shell of a man. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply over the ambient noise of the panicking crowd. He was locked in steel, his hands secured tightly behind his back, stripped of every ounce of his generational dignity, in front of the exact people he had spent his life trying to impress. Brittany shrieked from the stage, watching her father being read his rights, but the agents ignored her entirely. A moment later, Trent was dragged out from the catering corridor. His custom jacket was torn at the shoulder. His perfectly styled hair hung limply in his face. His hands were bound tightly behind his back. The golden boy of Chicago real estate was being paraded through his own gala like a common criminal. Trent looked wildly around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to bail him out. He looked for his loyal investors. They physically turned their backs to him. He looked for his lawyers. They were already speaking to federal agents offering full cooperation to save their own licenses. Finally, Trent's desperate gaze landed on his mother. Beatrice was standing entirely alone in the center of the VIP section. Her private security guards had completely vanished. Her wealthy friends had scattered to the edges of the room. She watched her golden boy, the son she had sacrificed her entire family's legacy to protect the son she had stolen millions for being shoved toward the exit by federal authorities. The reality of her total destruction finally broke her. Beatrice let out a high, ragged wail that pierced the roar of the crowd. It was a sound of absolute, unhinged agony. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the imported marble floor, her expensive diamond necklace scraping against the stone. She beat her manicured hands against the cold floor, sobbing hysterically, screaming Trent's name over and over again. Courtney stood next to me, her posture rigid, watching the woman who had tormented us for years unravel completely. There was no pity in Courtney's eyes, only the cold satisfaction of a lifetime of abuse finally balancing out. But the true poetic justice was not coming from us. It was coming from Beatrice's own peers. The elite socialites, the women Beatrice had spent decades hosting at country clubs and manipulating for social dominance, were not stepping forward to help her up. They were not offering comfort or rushing to her side. Instead, they had pulled out their cell phones. Dozens of glowing screens were pointed directly at Beatrice, recording her public ruin in high definition. The very high society she had worshipped, the people she had destroyed her own family to impress, were now eagerly filming her breakdown to post online. They were watching her drown, and they were making sure the entire world got to see it. Two federal agents grabbed Trent by his arms, hauling him up from the stainless steel prep station and shoving him back out into the main ballroom. His custom-tailored tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, the fabric hanging limply against his arm. The golden boy of Chicago real estate, the man who had spent the last 5 years terrorizing me and manipulating everyone in his path, was completely broken. His hands were cuffed tightly behind his back. His perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess across his sweating forehead. He locked eyes with me as the agents marched him down the center aisle. He was searching my face for a shred of the compliant, terrified woman he used to control. He was looking for mercy. He found absolutely nothing. I stared back at him with the cold, unyielding precision of an accountant who had just balanced the final ledger. Trent opened his mouth, perhaps to hurl one last insult or to beg for a deal, but an agent shoved him forward, cutting off whatever pathetic words he was about to speak. Right behind him, Brittany's father was being frog-marched toward the exit. His head hung so low his chin rested on his chest. The man who had threatened to bury me in litigation just moments ago was now weeping silently, his generational pride shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. The high society crowd instinctively backed away from them, pressing themselves against the gilded walls and champagne tables. The investors and socialites were practically climbing over one another to avoid being photographed near the disgraced executives. Then a new sound cut through the heavy, panicked breathing of the ballroom. It was the sound of silk tearing and skin scraping against polished stone. I looked away from Trent's retreating figure and looked down. Beatrice was no longer screaming. The hysterical wailing had drained out of her, replaced by a raw, primal desperation. Her private security detail was gone. Her wealthy peers were actively recording her ruin on their smartphones, the bright flashes illuminating her tear-streaked face. She realized in a moment of absolute clarity that her entire world had just been vaporized. Beatrice dragged herself forward. She did not stand up. She physically could not. She crawled across the imported marble floor. The jagged shards of her shattered champagne flute bit into her knees, tearing the expensive fabric of her designer gown, but she did not stop. She dragged herself over the spilled alcohol and broken glass, moving directly toward the hem of my emerald dress. The ballroom fell entirely silent again. The only sound was the rustle of Beatrice's ruined gown as she dragged her body across the floor. She reached me. Her trembling, manicured hands reached out and desperately gripped the fabric of my skirt. She looked up at me, her aristocratic mask completely obliterated. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, heavy streams. The woman who had treated me like a repulsive infection for a decade was kneeling at my feet, weeping like a frightened child. Megan Beatrice choked out her voice, a ragged, breathless rasp. "Megan, please! You won! You proved your point! You destroyed his company! Please tell these men to stop! Call off the investigators! We can fix this quietly! We are family! Family forgives family!" I did not step back. I did not pull my dress away from her grasping hands. I stood perfectly still and looked down at her. I looked at the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. I looked at the expensive blowout and the imported silk. And then I looked past her. I remembered the biting sub-zero wind cutting through my thin coat. I remembered the terrifying sound of the deadbolt locking from the inside. I remembered the weight of my terrified daughter in my arms, shivering in the dark, completely abandoned by the people who possessed millions of dollars in stolen wealth. My expression turned to absolute ice. I leaned down slightly, ensuring my voice would carry only to her and the people standing immediately beside me. "You locked a 1-year-old baby out in the freezing snow." I stated my words, dropping like anvils onto the marble floor. "You picked the wrong family." Beatrice gasped, as if I had physically struck her. Her hands went completely slack, releasing my dress. She slumped forward, her forehead pressing against the cold floor, letting out a hollow, defeated whimper. Courtney stepped forward, looking down at her mother. The silver silk of her gown fluttered slightly as she delivered the final blow. "Goodbye, Beatrice," Courtney said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. I turned my back on the ruin of the Kensington and Vanguard empires. Thomas stepped up beside me, placing a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of immense protective pride. Andre flanked me on the left, his blue-backed federal portfolio tucked neatly under his arm. Courtney walked shoulder to shoulder with us. We did not run. We walked with the slow, deliberate stride of absolute victors. The crowd of Chicago's financial elite parted for us immediately. They did not look at us with disdain or judgment. They looked at us with profound, unmistakable fear. We walked straight down the center aisle, leaving the flashing cameras and the weeping matriarch far behind us. We pushed through the heavy rotating brass doors of the hotel lobby and stepped out into the crisp, freezing Chicago night. The biting wind hit my face, but for the first time in years, it did not feel oppressive. It felt entirely refreshing. The street in front of the Grand Hotel was no longer lined with valet attendants and luxury sedans. It was completely locked down. The flashing red and blue lights of half a dozen police cruisers and unmarked federal vehicles illuminated the pavement. But they were not the only ones waiting. The tip Andre had anonymously provided to the local news stations had paid off spectacularly. Massive media vans were screeching to a halt along the curb, their satellite dishes already extending toward the sky. Reporters were sprinting across the icy pavement, clutching microphones, their camera crews trailing closely behind them with glaring white floodlights. Trent's glorious $50 million merger announcement, his ultimate coronation into the elite, had just been transformed into the biggest white-collar crime bust of the entire decade. We stood on the top step of the hotel entrance, bathed in the flashing lights, and watched the news cameras swarm the federal agents dragging Trent into the back of an armored vehicle. The golden boy was gone. The debt was collected. The ledger was finally balanced. The flashing red and blue lights faded in the rearview mirror of Thomas's town car as we pulled away from the hotel. The silence inside the cabin was profound. It was not heavy with tension, but rather light, with absolute, undeniable victory. We had walked into the lion's den and left it in ruins. The next morning, the financial world woke up to a seismic shockwave. Trent's face was splashed across every major news network and financial publication in the country. The Apex merger was officially dead, and the federal indictments were unsealed for the public to devour. The justice system is notorious for moving slowly, but when you hand federal prosecutors a perfectly organized, decrypted map of a massive wire fraud conspiracy, the gears turn with terrifying speed. Trent's high-priced defense attorneys took one single look at the forensic evidence I had compiled and immediately advised him to take a plea deal. He refused out of sheer, blinding arrogance. He genuinely believed he could charm a jury the same way he had charmed his investors. It was the worst mistake of his entire life. The trial lasted barely 3 weeks. I took the stand for 2 days, methodically walking the jury through every hidden offshore account, every forged signature, and every illegal wire transfer. Trent sat at the defense table, his face pale and sunken, finally realizing that his charisma was entirely useless against cold, hard mathematics. When the verdict was read, he stood trembling. The judge did not mince words, calling his actions a systematic, predatory destruction of trust. Trent was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. There would be no early parole. His designer suits were traded for a standard-issue jumpsuit, and his penthouse view was permanently replaced by cinder-block walls and steel bars. Beatrice thought she could insulate herself from the fallout. She assumed her late husband's old money trusts would shield her from the disaster. She was entirely wrong. Courtney's civil suit was a masterpiece of aggressive legal strategy. The court ordered Beatrice to pay full immediate restitution for the decades of stolen inheritance she had kept from her daughter. The asset freeze hit her bank accounts the exact same morning she was formally evicted from her sprawling gated estate. Her country club revoked her membership instantly. Her high society friends, the same women who had eagerly filmed her breakdown at the gala, stopped returning her calls and blocked her number. Stripped of Vanguard and drained of every stolen dollar, the woman who once dictated the social hierarchy of Chicago was forced to move into a rundown trailer park on the industrial outskirts of the city. She now spent her days staring at peeling linoleum and rusty aluminum siding, her meager monthly Social Security check garnished to repay the daughter she had emotionally abused for decades. Brittany's fall from grace was equally severe. With her father facing his own federal charges and all their family assets seized and liquidated by Thomas's firm to cover their debts, she was left with absolutely nothing. The trust fund princess who had openly mocked my work ethic was abruptly forced to get a minimum wage job just to survive. She now spent her days standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a suburban mall, folding clothes at a mid-tier retail store. She dealt with rude customers and aching feet for 9 hours a shift, handing over her painfully small paychecks to cover her family's mounting insurmountable legal fees. Fast forward 12 months, The toxic smog that had hung over my life had completely cleared. My forensic accounting firm, once a quiet operation run out of a small, cramped office, had tripled in size and revenue. Corporations and elite law firms were practically begging to retain our services to audit their own internal ledgers. I had hired a team of incredible sharp-minded women, and we were billing out at premium rates respected and feared in equal measure across the city. Andre's brilliant, flawless execution of the legal strategy had earned him a massive promotion. He was now a named partner at his firm, his name etched in bold brass lettering right on the heavy glass doors of their downtown high-rise. But the true victory was not the money, the professional recognition, or even the downfall of my enemies. It was the absolute unshakable peace. I stood on the wooden dock of Thomas's private lakeside cabin, holding a mug of warm coffee. The early morning sun was just beginning to burn off the white mist hovering over the glass-like water. A few yards away, Thomas was sitting on an overturned bucket, patiently baiting a fishing hook for Lily. My daughter let out a bright, uninhibited laugh as a small silver fish jumped near their red and white bobber. Thomas smiled down at her, a genuine warm expression that completely erased the lethal, terrifying edge he carried in the boardroom. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the crisp, clean morning air against my face. I had not just survived the vicious storm Trent and Beatrice had tried to drown me in. I had captured the lightning, redirected the flood, and washed them away entirely. I looked at my daughter, safe, blissfully happy, and surrounded by people who would move mountains to protect her. I smiled, letting the morning sun warm my skin, knowing with absolute certainty that I had built this beautiful life on a foundation of ironclad boundaries, relentless intelligence, and cold, hard facts. The profound lesson woven through these stories is that your true worth is never defined by those who fail to appreciate you, even your own family. Often, the people closest to us are blinded by their own insecurities, projecting their limitations onto our lives. True empowerment begins the exact moment you stop seeking their external validation. By establishing ironclad boundaries against toxic behavior, you reclaim your independence. You possess the absolute right to walk away from any environment where you are undervalued and purposefully build your own peace. Please share your own experiences with establishing difficult boundaries and comment below.